Hello, hopefully everyone can see me, hear me, so we can get the David 67 channel live stream for the 11th of June started. Good evening to Pat McLaughlin, if he's still around. Evening to one of the regulars. Been on pretty much every live stream since we started them about 10, 11 months ago. Good evening to you as well. Hail, Kieran Ireland 5367, another of the regulars. Excuse me, just a wee bit of a rough sore throat today. A wee bit of a snuffly nose as well. But should be fine to keep going for a few hours of hopefully polite, respectful debate, discussion of all the various news stories. Lovely to have you on as well, Paul Maguire 3382. Yep, Kieran Allen. The weather's been really changeable, and I live over in the countryside over on the east coast of Scotland and east central Scotland in the Fife area, and the weather's been really bizarre. Sunshine, heavy rain, hailstones, thunder and lightning. Never quite know from 1 minute to the next what the weather's going to be. And obviously, for me, also quite a bit of hay fever and so on at the moment as well, which causes me a bit of bother. Hello to you, Sean South Gary Owen, Sligo boy. Great to have you on as well. Again, one of the regulars. Quite right, Kieran Ireland. Celtic remain the champions and will be champions at least all the way from now in early mid-June, all the way through to the end of May of 2027. So we've got at least 11 months of being the champions of Scotland, and 100% certain that this time next year in 2027, Celtic will be champions again, and a double or a treble in the locker for Celtic and Martin Neal and his players and his backroom staff. So some good news coming through around about 11 in the morning, 12 noon, that Martin Neal has officially been confirmed as Celtic's manager under contract for 12 months with a 1-year rolling contract on top of that. I think, as I said on last week's live stream, I think appointing Martin Neal makes an awful lot of sense. It gives hopefully Celtic another 12 months of stability, another 12 months of success. As I said, I did think that the manager for this season and possibly next season was going to need to be an experienced manager, because I think there will be quite a bit of rebuilding of the team. I think quite a few of the regulars that we've had for the last 3-4 years or so will be moving on. A couple of the newer players who've been big stars for us recently will be moving on, and I think it's also probably a time for whoever the manager is and the backroom people scouting recruitment to be looking to replace some of the long-standing Celtic players. James Forrest, I think next season will be his last season. I think Cal McGregor, probably, assuming that he does stay and doesn't disappear off to Saudi for a couple of years, I think probably Cal McGregor's career will be finishing at Celtic in a couple of years' time, especially if his fitness issues don't improve. And so I do think there's quite a bit of a rebuilding needing done over the next 12 months, 24 months. But I think if Celtic do get the rebuild right, there's a lot of good players, I think, at Celtic, and a lot of players at Celtic currently who will get better and better over the next few years, and with a good transfer window or two, we can build further and further on that. So Kieran Allen, we start building now. Here's hoping new strength coming in all over the squad. Some leave, need to recruit. Well, couldn't agree more. That's 100% bang on the money. Paul McGuire eventually announced today, took their time, let the rebuild begin. Couldn't agree more. I'm completely, totally right again. Sean South, Gary Owen, Nancy blunder and payoff is an excuse I heard for reducing the backroom staff wages. Who knows what's going on? All I would say is that a couple of journalists have put stories out there with absolutely nothing in the way of documentary proof, no emails, no texts, no phone calls, no statements, no interviews, just these are the stories that we are saying. And like all journalists, they get their stories right about one time in every 3 or 4 stories. So maybe this is one of the stories they get right. Maybe it's one of the 3 or 4 stories that they get wrong. One of the ones who put it forward produced a whole lot of different theories and stories over the Kasper Dolberg affair at the transfer window last year, all of which proved to be complete and utter nonsense. Who knows? All I would say, Sean South, Gary Owen, Sligo Boy, is any payment to Wilfred Nancy and his coaches would have been in the last financial year rather than this financial year, because obviously that was in January. And so I don't know what to believe. As I said, I would love for the Glasgow Herald journalist and the Scottish Sun football journalist to say, here is the evidence. If this was a court, or if this was a school and you're being asked to write an essay to support who the greatest Scotsman of all time was, or what were the theories about the development of the First World War or the Second World War, you would be asked by your teacher, if you were a pupil writing an essay, to produce 10 bits of evidence to back up your theory. Or if you're in court, you'd be asked to produce video evidence of you speeding or not speeding, or video evidence of the car crash, or whatever it might be. And as things stand, as far as I can see, there's absolutely no evidence to back anything up. It's a story produced by a Sun Sport journalist and a story produced by a Glasgow Herald journalist. And it's all just rumours, and who knows? And as was very apparent with all the nonsense after the Hearts Celtic game, with the pitch incursions by the fans, and then all accusations of Hearts players being assaulted and injured, and this, that, and the other, and the police telling Hearts to go home, and so on. All that proved to be complete and utter nonsense. So. John O'Shea, I would tend to agree that they're all talking nonsense because we're champions again. I think there's nothing that I think that 90% of the footballing press in Scotland likes producing stories that gives Celtic a good kicking. They write their stories and then never really apologise when, as I said, three times out of every 4 they get their stories completely and utterly wrong. Because most journalists that I've encountered in the past tend to try and have 2 or 3 corroborating bits of evidence before they actually launch their story on television or the newspapers. It appears with football journalists, you write your story and you hope the evidence comes in. So, Kieran Allen, we should be watching the Swiss, the Czechs, the Iranian teams, things like that, to see what players look good and affordable. World Cup has a lot of teams that have value players in. I'm thinking I think that's again an absolutely brilliant theory. I think there are some there will be lots of very highly talented players playing for some of the smaller countries, some players playing for smaller teams as part of bigger squads. I think there are going to be quite a number of players from the less popular countries and the less favoured countries who are going to prove over the next month or so that they actually are very good players. I think there could well be a number of good signings out there. As I say, Celtic in the past has had good success signing from the less popular leagues. Obviously, we've had lots of good players from the Japanese league, J League. We had obviously Hatate, Maeda, and Kyogo in quick succession. Tomoki Iwata was a relatively big success. Even with signing Hayato Inamura, Celtic's made a £1 million profit between what we bought him for last season, which was £250,000, and reportedly we're now going to sell him to Tokyo FC for 1.3 million. So I think there is a lot of good, high-quality players out there, and also, what's more, players who would be willing to come and play for Celtic. I think the problem with a lot of the bigger nations and the bigger clubs, Celtic and Scottish football in general, but also Celtic by an extension, doesn't have the same prestige and attraction that it may have had for really top quality players. But I think when you're coming from a lesser, smaller league or smaller financial type of club, Japan, America, the Far East, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, Celtic can certainly still be a place to make your name. And there are one or two very interesting names circulating, and I'm 100% certain that come Monday the 15th of June, for 4 days' time, that Celtic will start making concrete bids for various different players. There are a few interesting names out there. Anyway, so as is the case with Celtic, and as is the case actually pretty much with nearly every other football club in the world, things don't tend to get released terribly much. So Celtic are probably a bit less transparent than most football clubs, but most football clubs tend to keep a lot of the negotiations and transfers and contracts and deals and stuff behind the scenes. So who quite knows what's going on with Sean Maloney and Mark Fotheringham? The assumption is that O'Neill wants those two. I haven't heard him say so far that he wants them to be his coaches, but the assumption would be that's what he does want. Hello to you, JG211. Great to have you on. Clashman Numpty, good evening to you. Great to have you back on. Based on inflation since the transfer fees, Martin O'Neill's first time around signings are as follows: Chris Sutton, 6.6 million, now 11.5. Neil Lennon, 5.7, now 11.3. Alan Thompson was 2.7, now 5.2. I think, unfortunately, the thing is, we'd probably, given the nature of English football, which is where we signed all those three players from, I think it's unlikely we'd be able to get a player of the fame and success of a Chris Sutton and Neil Lennon or Alan Thompson to come to Celtic. Much, much more likely that all those players would be leaving the clubs they're at to go to Nottingham Forest or Brentford or Crystal Palace or Bournemouth or whomever. I think, unfortunately, to get one of the top scorers in the English Premier League, as was the case with Chris Sutton. To get him to come to Celtic now, the equivalent of him to come to Celtic now, I don't think that's going to happen. Neil Lennon, possibly, given the fact that he was a lifelong Celtic supporter, strong link with Martin O'Neill, maybe that sort of player would still come to Celtic. I think, unfortunately, however, they're much more likely to go to one of the English Premier League clubs, up the ladder from where they were playing, or go off to play in Italy, Spain, Germany, etc. But which is why I think Celtic probably need to look at other transfer markets and not get fixated on English players, English Premier League players, etc. Although there probably is very, very good quality in a lot of the backup players in the English Premier League. So a player like Julian Araujo, that sort of player could be a player that Celtic certainly could encourage to come to Celtic and maybe go for one of these loan to buy deals. They got us Cameron Carter-Vickers, got us Jota a few years ago. I think that's the kind of thing that Celtic probably will be looking at over the course of this summer. Combination of buying from top quality players from the less fashionable leagues and from the less fashionable countries, but still, I think, potentially high quality players. A lot of skepticism when Ange Postecoglou signed Kyogo and then signed two more Japanese players at the Christmas New Year time in his first season. But in the end, that all turned out really nicely. And obviously, the following winter, we got another great player in Alistair Johnston. Very good point, Pat McLaughlin. How much would it cost to buy a Chelsea striker now? I think it was last transfer window. We nearly got David Fofana, who was a sort of Chelsea reject. We would have got him for next to nothing. He would have been a loan for a season, then a buy option at the end. But I don't think Fofana would have been a particularly good signing. I think he would have been a bit like a Iheanacho, signing a player with a lot of injury problems. Hadn't scored an awful lot of goals recently. Pat McLaughlin, transfer market was far more even 25, 30 years ago. I couldn't think that's a brilliant, brilliant point. When Martin O'Neill came in to manage Celtic in 2000, as was evidenced by the players that Rangers signed around the same time, they were signing players from top big European clubs, signing internationals from Spain and Holland and England and so on and so on. I think, unfortunately, that Scottish clubs, Celtic and other Scottish clubs, can't really compete at that high level. So what we probably need to do, as I say, is scout really, really well, find players like Benjamin Nygren playing in Scandinavian leagues who turn into really top quality players, find players like Georgios Giakoumakis or Kyogo or Lee Labada or all these other examples, which Celtic has done more so in the Ange Postecoglou years of scouting and coaching. Kieran Allen, Celtic need to transform and still keep winning, so keeping the winners in the squad that played regular is a must, as many as we can, because a lot are going. That's a brilliant, brilliant point. And I think actually that was one of the reasons I thought Celtic failed to start last season particularly well under Brendan Rodgers. It was some of the transfer signings over last summer were rather poor. However, as can be the case with players, it takes a bit of time for players to settle into a new country, new diet, new lifestyle, new language, all these different things. So what you really need is your pre-existing players to really step up and bridge the gap, so that a player like Chineki or Balakwisha or Shinya Maeda or whomever gets a few months to settle into the team. I think one of the problems was quite a lot of those players were kind of thrown in at the deep end because players like Maeda, Hatate, Paulo Bernardo, Luke McCowan, James Forrest, etc., weren't really stepping up to the mark to bridge that gap. And for that reason, I think that's why Celtic had, amongst many other reasons, a rather poor August, September, October. So a combination of some transfer market signings that didn't work out. Also the fact that sometimes with transfer market signings, give them a few months to settle down and they start to get better and better. And Glashman update, I think Mikel Onge-Barlaquisha has turned out to be one of Celtic's worst signings of the last 25 years. There are a few other signings up there with Mikel Onge-Barlaquisha. Maybe Martin O'Neill and his coaching staff can do some magic, because a season or two ago there was a very, very decent player in Mikel Onge-Barlaquisha. As I say, he was in various different Belgian squads. He was one of the central players in the Belgian under-21 squad for many, many years. He was starting to bridge the gap like Nico Raskin and Arne Engels had been doing, and then his career kind of fell apart after some injuries. JJ211, the squad feels a little bit stale and needs a shake-up. I think too many players are not consistent enough unless they can step up. I think that's a brilliant point as well. And I think one of the things with all footballing squads is you do need to have a constant turnaround of players. And players coming up from other clubs, or coming up through from being backups to being starters, or coming from being academy players to backup players. You do need this constant turnover of players. And I think for me, there was quite a lot of staleness in Celtic's squad at the end of the 24-25 season, going into the start of the 25-26 season. Quite a lot of players who'd been at the club for a long, long time. A lot of players who seem to have a very, very settled place in the side, with no one really challenging them for that. Which is why I think that one of the things Celtic do need to do is to have somebody who can genuinely push Callum McGregor out the team. Maybe that's what he needs, is a kick up the backside of having someone who week in, week out is going to pressurise him for his place. I think there were too many players in the end of 24-25 and the start of 25-26 who were very, very almost complacent, a bit sense of entitlement that they were Celtic players and that no one was going to kick them out the side. And I do think that the squad and the team needed refreshed quite a bit. Sean South, Gary Owen, Strachan, McManus, Fotheringham, Maloney walk out would be some message. Well, the thing actually is, Strachan and Maloney actually have contracts with Celtic already. Fotheringham was on a temporary contract, but Strachan's is on a pre-existing contract with Celtic, as is Maloney. So Maloney is a Celtic member of staff on the contract he originally signed to be the transition manager or the developmental manager. So Maloney actually does have a contract with Celtic as things stand. So, as I said, that the story that's come out in the Herald and the Sun might be true, but there's absolutely no evidence to back it up. And if I was going to write a story for the newspapers, or if I was going to do a story in a video, I would at least try and find lots of different sources. And then if I do a video about a player or do a video to illustrate my own opinion, I do try and put on the screen the evidence that I'm using to say that such and such is a good player, or such and such should have been a penalty kick or not a penalty kick. So so far, I haven't seen any evidence to back up the contention of those two journalists. And as I say, an awful lot of journalists out there do like to give Celtic a good kicking when they can. And obviously that's the same at the BBC, Sky, STV, TalkSport, all these different places. There's a lot more footage and a lot more mileage and a lot more clicks in giving Celtic or Rangers a very big kicking. And there's less footage and less mileage and less clicks if you write a nice story about Celtic than you'll get when you write a nasty story. The other thing that came to my mind regarding the potential issue with Maloney and Fotheringham signing contracts with Celtic is we do know that Martin O'Neill is on a 1-year contract with a 1-year option after that. If I was Sean Maloney or Fotheringham, I probably would want more job security than signing a contract that was a 1-year contract with a 1-year rolling contract on top of that. So maybe that's the stumbling block. No one really knows if there is a stumbling block. And if there is a stumbling block, is it because Celtic don't want to give them a certain amount of money? Is it because Celtic don't want to give them a 5-year contract? Who knows? It's all being done behind the scenes. Hopefully, in the next few days, it'll all settle itself down. And to be thoroughly fair, the players don't actually come back into training until another sort of 2 or 3 weeks from now. Be towards the end of June that the players will be coming back off training. So for the next couple of weeks, from when the transfer window opens on the 15th of June, probably for the 2 weeks after that, it's going to be a lot of scouting, recruitment, inquiring about players. The thing also is players may not be available for transfer and negotiations and medicals and stuff until the World Cup's over. Some clubs may not want to discuss transfers, etc., until the war's over. Sean South, Gary on, Sligo Boy. Why don't we really know sounds of the board as usual? Yes, well, the thing is, I don't know what particular field of work you work in or used to work in, but most employers, most bosses, most companies, hospitals, lawyers, schools, factories, multinational companies, supermarkets, they don't tend to share details of contracts and negotiations in public. So I'm not quite sure why football clubs have this duty to be 100% transparent. If Celtic are in negotiations with Fotheringham and Maloney's agents and lawyers and so on, and if Celtic's lawyers and financial people are in negotiations with them, the best way to do negotiations is for it all to be done legally and through in private and with backward and forwards. And as I said, we don't know anything because nobody knows anything, and so I don't think we can necessarily believe stories written by journalists from the Sun and the Herald who have about a 25% success rate with the accuracy of their stories, particularly if they're not actually producing anything in their articles to back up what their theory is. Anyway, for me, the most important thing is that we have got Martin O'Neill as the figurehead. We have some pre-existing coaches at Celtic already. Sean Maloney is contracted to Celtic as a Celtic employee, whether that's as the assistant manager or whether that's the role that he was doing up until October of 2025. He is a Celtic employee one way or another. And it could be about money, it could be about contract clauses, it could be about duration, it could be about job security. If Martin O'Neill decides, due to the fact he'll be 75 next season, that he doesn't want to carry on any longer, that would then leave Maloney and Fotheringham in a bit of a position, because whoever Celtic's new manager after that, if O'Neill thinks at 75 he's now too old, then those two are in a bit of a lurch because the new manager might not want them. So it's an extremely complicated thing. So I think the 1-year contract for O'Neill, with a 1-year rolling contract on top of that, is a tremendous deal for Martin O'Neill. I think it's a really good deal for Celtic at the moment, but it does create a bit of uncertainty for whoever's going to be O'Neill's backup, such as Maloney, Fotheringham, McManus, etc., etc. Who knows? Yeah. So Clashman Numpty saying they found Lord Lucan in the cafe sitting next to Michael Nicholson. Well, I am reliably informed that Michael Nicholson spoke in public for the first time in about a year, welcoming Martin O'Neill to the club as a permanent manager. I think, to be fair to Michael Nicholson, he has made statements off and on for the last several years. Just he doesn't do press conferences, doesn't do sit-down interviews with anybody apart from Celtic TV. I think those are all things that are wrong. I think, as I've said 100 times before, I think people like Michael Nicholson should be on camera much more often, taking questions, etc. And I think Celtic should actually have actual press relation people, spokespeople who actually do appear on television and for press conferences and for written media and for Celtic fan sites and YouTube sites and stuff. I think there should be people who are available as spokesmen for Celtic, spokesman for Michael Nicholson, spokesman for Martin O'Neill, etc. The in general terms in British football and most European football nations, the manager of the club or the head coach of the club does a tremendous amount of being a spokesman for the club. In American sport, there typically there are much more spokespeople that speak on behalf of the coach or the chief executive, as well as having access to those people much more openly for questions and answers and press conferences and interviews and stuff. So I do think that not just at Celtic, but at all football clubs in Scotland and United Kingdom, there should be a lot more openness of access to chief executives, people from behind the scenes, but also I think clubs should be much better at using spokespeople to get news out there. And I think then possibly Celtic might actually get more positive news stories out on TV and in the press, because 99% of the news stories that are on the TV in Scotland or in Scottish newspapers and sports journals are negative stories about Celtic. It's very, very rare to see a positive story put out by the BBC, Sky Sports, STV, the Sun, the Herald, the Record, whatever, the Scotsman, whatever it might be. I think Celtic probably should do a bit more positive news stories out there. Green for goal, 1969. I think we should cash in on Engels. We need a replacement for Trusty. He makes Effie Ambrose look like Frank Rijkaard. Well, I think we should definitely. I don't think Engels wants to stay at Celtic any longer. We bought him for about £11 million. There are reportedly several bids of £25 million plus ready and going from Nottingham Forest. There were two other clubs in England. AC Milan were reportedly wanting to offer about that for Engels as well. So I don't think selling Engels is going to be a particular problem. I don't think he wants to stay at Celtic. So I would be happy to, if we bought him for 11, to sell him for 20 million plus. I think with Dyson Maeda's positive end to last season, I think probably, again, he wants to move on reportedly. I'm pretty sure, again, Celtic can cash in on Maeda for £20 million plus. So, yep. However, I think personally, Trusty's a wee better defender than Effie Ambrose. I think we have to remember all last season, Trusty was playing on the wrong side of the defence, apart from a couple of games where he played as the left centre back because Scales was injured or Scales was suspended, or Scales had to move across the left back to be Kieran Tierney. And when I think Trusty's best games last season were where he was playing in his preferred position, which is left centre back. However, at Celtic at the moment, Liam Scales is at left centre back. He doesn't get swapped to right centre back. It's always been Trusty that has to play on the wrong side of defence. So I think in some ways one could say that he's been slightly that Trusty's sort of metaphorically playing with one leg or one arm tied behind his back, and that he's playing on the wrong side. And I think also he's had quite a lot of uncertainty and quite a lot of different other people playing on his right side at right back, Donovan, Johnston, Arojo, and Ralston over the season. So again, that's causing him difficulty. He had to be possibly the one who made the most changes to the way that he played football in the Wilfred Nancy system. So I do think Trusty has been. I think we do need to be a bit fair to Trusty personally. Other people might not want to be fair to Trusty. I think Trusty's actually, when he plays in his preferred left centre back position, I think he's a better centre back than Liam Scales. But just my personal opinion. Slab and Cabbage, if Engels goes, he break the Scottish football record outgoing transfer. I think certainly it's going to be right up there with the deal that took Tierney to Arsenal, Jota to Saudi, O'Reilly down to Brighton. I think it's going to certainly be up in the high 20s, something in the region of those ones. So there's a very good chance you could well be right, Slab and Cabbage, that it could well be a record-breaking deal. Very good pun there from Clashman Numpty in regarding to Sligo Boy going under his other name, and being like Prince the Symbol. Green for go, good point. I think we need a decent left back. Tierney will be knackered after training and playing for Scotland in the heat of America. To be fair, the heat in Boston, which is where two of Scotland's three matches, isn't going to be quite so terrible as it will be for the third game, which is down in Miami. Miami is going to be incredibly hot at this time of year. Boston being much more northeast is a lot more of still going to be very, very hot, still going to be up in the 80s, but not up in the hundreds like it will be in much of America. However, completely agree. He could drain them, could be flagging for the start of next season. I do think Celtic, I think left back is a priority position. Again, there are rumours that Sirachi, Celtic have been negotiating with Sirachi. Again, Whether that's got any truth to it or not, we don't know. Some rumours that we've been in negotiations with bringing Julian Araujo back. I think Araujo is much more likely to go back to play in either Spain or more likely to go back to play in America or Mexico, rather than staying in England with Bournemouth, or staying at Celtic permanently. I think Sirachi is possibly a better bet for coming to Celtic than Araujo, all things considered. Interesting point from Clashman Numpty on a non-Celtic basis. How did Stephen Naismith get an ESTA? He's done more illegal driving than Johnny Weissmuller. Well, it certainly is a really, really shocking turn of events, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of Scottish football fans, and I dare say some Celtic fans, who've spent tens of thousands of pounds to get tickets and flights to go to America, and then at the last minute they've had their travel documents, their ETSAs or their visas revoked. Reportedly, there was one Scottish fan who was at Glasgow Airport or Edinburgh Airport to fly to Boston, and he got told when he got to customs that his visa had been revoked by the American government. So it is actually, I think, an absolutely atrocious turn of events. Same with barring the Somalian referee when he came into Miami Airport, putting him through 11 hours of interrogation, or the Iraqi international captain, 8 hours of interrogation at the port in Chicago. It's just absolutely awful. It's not football, and I don't know if anybody watched the supposed press conference by Infantino yesterday from FIFA. I thought that was absolutely disgusting. He should be standing up for the players. He should be standing up for the fans. He should be standing up for the referees. He should be standing up for the football tournament, and not kowtowing to politicians in America, and kowtowing to big business and big money. The ticket prices in America are terrible. The accommodation prices in America are terrible. The fees for public transport in America are terrible. The visa conditions are terrible. The immigration conditions are terrible. It's the complete opposite. If you think about the fact that prior to this, we had a World Cup in Qatar, a World Cup in Russia, and getting in and out those countries was 1,000 times easier. The restrictions on fans and players and officials were very loose for both those ones. Yep. Yes, Sean South, Gary Owen, Somalian ref, has been awarded the Super Cup final by UEFA, PSG against Villa. He was the African referee of the year. He reportedly is a very, 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 very good, high quality referee. Referees last season and the season before some of the biggest club games and international games. And so very, very highly thought of referee. Had all the right documents, plus he had diplomatic documents from the Somalian government. And then suddenly, after 11 hours of interrogation, he gets sent back on his airplane back to Istanbul. So I was very pleased when I saw that UEFA had given them the reward of that. So, Rubber Duck 67, does anyone know where the rumours of reduced pay for backroom staff came from? As far as I can see, there is no actual concrete evidence of this. This was a story that was put forward by a journalist from the Glasgow Herald and a journalist from the Scottish Sun sports team, both of whom are reportedly Celtic insiders. But for Celtic insiders, they get their stories wrong, much more often wrong than right. And at a rough guess, their success rate is 1 correct story out of 4. So maybe this is going to be their correct story. So there's some linking this to the Wilfred Nancy and his coaches payoff, given the fact that those coaches and Nancy were at the club for 1 month. It's unlikely that the payoff of their contracts would be that great because they were, or that high, because they were only in contract for 1 month. And then a lot of times, if you move from one in the real world, if you move from one company to another, there are various different sub clauses in your contract that mean if you don't meet certain criteria within a certain length of time, you don't get bonuses, you don't go to the next stage. So I would be very surprised if the payoffs to those coaches was that high. Although we'll find out when the financial figures come out a wee bit later on this year, when Celtic's official tax and reports and stuff come out later on this year. But I would be surprised if the Nancy and his coach payoffs were that great, because they'd only been in the job for 1 month. But maybe Celtic drew up very, very nice contracts for Nancy and his coaches, and certainly Brendan Rodgers seemed to take quite a lot of money out of his deal with Celtic, out the club, when he left last October. Ernest Mosley, Infantilo makes Sepp Blatter look squeaky clean. Well, I did honestly think that getting rid of Sepp Blatter 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever it was actually going to help clean up FIFA and clean up world football. But you're quite right, it's gone even further down the metaphorical toilet since then. Paul Boy 67, not as bad as yesterday. Brazil ladies had eight women sent off. I saw that story on YouTube. I wasn't aware that it was a Brazil against America women's match. I just assumed it was a warm-up friendly between Brazil and America. I didn't actually watch the video. I just saw the headline, the thumbnail type thing flashing through. So Slabbing Cabbage says, as much as I'm inclined to believe the board trying to shortchange Martin O'Neill's coaching team, if it's coming from the Sun, the insider is probably we as Isabel from Celtic Park Tap Pie Stall. As I said, I would be very happy to believe the story, and I think there could be a wee bit of truth to it. But I would just love to see an email saying, "Dear Mr. Maloney, dear Mr. Fotheringham, this is the contract offer." Or, dear Mr. Smith, the agent for Maloney or Fotheringham, here is the contract offer. Or some kind of document that's been leaked or released or whatever from within Celtic's finance department or admin department or human resources department. But there's none of those things. It's just a journalist from one paper and a journalist from another paper saying, this is what it is. And as Slabbing Cabbage is kind of pointing towards, the Sun produced a whole lot of stories last year that were absolutely completely utter nonsense. The Glasgow Herald with their journalist Stephen McGowan produced a whole lot of stories, complete nonsense. As I said, the way that the newspapers, the radio stations, the TV companies covered the Celtic Hearts game with the supposed assaults of Hearts players and Hearts players being injured, and the police ferrying Hearts off away from the ground early, all were completely and utter nonsense. But for 2 or 3 days, you couldn't move for stories implying that all that was the gospel truth. And little by little, over the weeks and month now, it now appears, as was the case with Cammy Devlin, the Hearts player, or actually out of contract Hearts player, saying no Hearts players were injured, no Hearts players were assaulted. There was a bit of verbals, but there was nobody was actually touched, hit, assaulted, injured in any way. But for days and days and days, every newspaper, the BBC, Sky, TalkSport, STV, everybody in the printed media and the TV media were saying that was the truth. Ball Boy Bloom needs prosecuted for the nonsense that he was talking. I think some things were said in the heat of the moment by various different people from Hearts. I can understand why Hearts may have put out a bit of misinformation. They were upset, they were frustrated. I think possibly 1 or 2 things may have been misconstrued and stuff, misquoted and misunderstood. One of the problems with the English language is one word can mean 4 or 5 different things depending on the context you're using it in. There's been a few wee stories recently where footballers particularly have used words, or football managers have used words and they've been slightly misconstrued. A whole lot of fuss about Craig Gordon talking about injustice. Well, injustice doesn't necessarily mean anything to do with the law or truth, etc. Injustice also means a sense of unfairness. And in some ways, one could argue that with Hearts having been on top for 215 days continuous from September through to May, it's a wee bit unfair for them to lose the title with 3 minutes to go in the last game of the season. Obviously, I was massively delighted that Celtic won the title with a goal 3 minutes from the end of time in the last game of the season. But one could argue that there was a sense of unfairness to have got all that distance into a title and lost it at the last second. I know I felt a sense of unfairness when Celtic blew the title way back in that awful 2-1 defeat to Motherwell in the last game of the season. It seemed very, very unfair that Celtic, top of the table for ages that season, in the last game of the season, 8 minutes to go, we lost the title to Rangers, who came from behind. And I dare say Hearts could also have felt the same when they blew the title, having lost to Dundee 2-0. Celtic got a big win on the last day of the season. So I think there are sometimes words can be a bit confusing and a bit misconstrued. And I think personally, Craig Gordon was talking about an unfairness that they'd been on top for so long and then they lost it at the last minute, rather than talking about cheating or any legalities or court cases or anything like that. Anyway, please, in the comment section, please be nice to each other. Everybody on this forum is, as far as an equally valid, equally valued person. Different people have different opinions. I'm an equal opportunities person. I'm a big fan of, been a big fan of Celtic for 50 odd years. Celtic football fans come in all shapes and sizes, all genders, all religions, all skin colours, all different nationalities. And I'm all for Celtic being a metaphorical Broadchurch of all those different things. So, good. I'm glad, Alison Timpany, that you're flirting, not hating. I'm just I'm sure that's true. If that's true, that's absolutely wonderful. It's one of the slight difficulties of being the presenter, moderator, linking person. That sometimes one comment might be nice and benign and a teasing type of thing. Is a wee bit difficult sometimes. Anyway. Feed the Bear 67. Wonder what price you'd have got for 3 red cards. Must have been in the hundreds. Honest to goodness, Feed the Bear, I really start to worry more and more about, particularly in America. In America, betting actually in a lot of places is illegal. There are only certain states in America that betting and gambling is actually legal. So a lot of online sports betting, although it is nationwide in America, the parent company for the sports line betting has to be based in one of the states where gambling and betting is legal. So I do worry a lot about match fixing. I don't know if anybody on the channel is a cricket fan, but massive scandals over the years in cricket for match fixing. Obviously, in football, there's been a lot of controversy and about match fixing in particularly in the old days, not so much in new days, but things like red cards, throw-ins, corner kicks, all these things apparently have been part of spread betting type controversies and criminal schemes. So I do worry when you do get an odd thing like so many red cards in the first game of the World Cup. Yep, Pat McLaughlin, a well-known, great expert on and great success with his bets and punditry on things. So, Paul Boy, cricket. Well, as I said, I have always been a person. I love watching all sorts of sports because of my dad, of where he was partly brought up because of the war. He was evacuated from Edinburgh to live in Yorkshire for a few years during the war. So and he obviously in Yorkshire, a lot of cricket is a very big sport in Yorkshire. And so when he moved back from being evacuated to family in Yorkshire back to Edinburgh, he started playing cricket for his school and for the club in the area and stuff. So if we're going to blame anyone for me liking cricket, it's my dad as well. But the school that I played for, the state school that I played for in Fife, cricket was a big sport in the summer for there as well. So I like cricket as well. And in the words of 10cc from Clash by Numpty, I don't like cricket. I love it. Well, yes, I like cricket. And cricket being a summer sport, football being primarily a summer, autumn, winter, spring football. It was nice at our school. We moved on from playing football and rugby and hockey and so on, and to playing cricket in the final term. So anyway, I was just using cricket as an example of where spread betting and match fixing and stuff was a worry. Slabbing Cabbage. I'd love to go to USA, but I've read a few stories about people sleeping in hotel rooms, and someone just discharging a firearm in the next door room and being killed. To be fair, I do actually have quite a number of members of my family who live in America. Touch wood, they've never ever had that sort of problem. Feed the Bear, no, I never did play against Andy Gorham. Once I left school, I have not played cricket since I was 18. So I left school at age 18. haven't played cricket since then, so it's nearly 40 years since I last played cricket. I did play cricket with and against a couple of players who played Test match cricket when I was younger, but certainly never with Andy Gorham. I think he played for one of the clubs in the Edinburgh area and also played for Scotland at cricket as well as playing for Scotland at football. Anyway, yes, so very interesting from Clash by Numpty. His brother stole programmes outside Old Trafford Cricket Ground. I still like watching cricket. Scotland's got a cricket team. The Scotland women's cricket team's in the World Cup starting this week. So I like watching all sport. So football, massively my favourite sport, but I do like watching cricket. I like watching athletics. I like watching American football, gridiron football in the winter time. Clash Numpty, I played rounders with the lassies. Does that count? Yes. Well, at my daughter's school, rounders was a big sport that they played, particularly in the summer. So again, her school would play netball and hockey most of the time, and then the girls would play rounders and the boys would play cricket in the final term. So anyway, quite right. Ernest mostly both of them played for Scunthorpe at football, played for England at cricket. There's been quite a number of players who've played both sports, and probably no one's old enough, but Arsenal way back in the 40s and 50s had a player called Dennis Compton, who was a brilliant football player, but he was also one of England's greatest cricketers. And so there has been quite a history. Phil Neville, for example, apparently was one of the most talented young teenage players in cricket in Lancashire area. People would say he was almost certainly going to be a Test match topless, a top level cricketer, but he chose to go and play football because obviously there was so much more money to be a footballer than a cricketer. Very, very sorry that you were restricted at your school, Alison Timpany, not to get to play with cricket bats and hockey sticks, etc. Certainly. With all respect in the world, Clash by Numpty, I think we're getting a wee bit ridiculous. Topless cricket, topless darts. I'm not saying anybody else in the world has to like cricket. I'm not saying anybody else on the forum has to like cricket. I like cricket. I like watching virtually all sports. Football by far my favourite. Ernest mostly Freddie Flintoff's cousins, a pal of yours, both Presses North End. Well, Freddie Flintoff's a good example. As a teenage schoolboy player, Freddie Flintoff and Phil Neville played in the same teams. Phil Neville was a star player for the Lancashire schoolboys team that Freddie Flintoff was also the star of. And obviously Freddie Flintoff, and anybody who's a non-cricket fan, became one of England's great players of the 2000s, the 2010s. He's now a coach for various different cricket teams now. So reportedly, Phil Neville turned down a big contract for Lancashire cricket to instead go and play for Man United at football. Obviously, earned a lot more money playing for Man United at football. You're going to beat England 2-1. Very, very interesting. Great to have you back, Eddie C. Good evening, David. Not been on for a few weeks on holiday. Santa Ponza for us winning double. Anyway, yep, it was a nice end to the season nice end of the season, beating Rangers, beating Motherwell, beating Hearts in the space of 6 days, and then coming back 7 days later to beat Dunfermline in the cup final, a double that not many people would have predicted at the start of the year when Celtic were losing 3-1 to Rangers under Wilfred Nancy in Wilfred Nancy's last game of the season. However, Celtic, for all the mistakes they made last year, made a very brave, swift decision to sack Wilfred Nancy rather than giving him another few weeks to prove himself. Martin O'Neill bailed us out, turned the team around again, and Celtic finished the season with 7 league games in a row winning, plus obviously beating St Mirren in the semi-final in Dunfermline in the final. So a really good unbeaten run, 100% win rate at the end of the season to turn things around. Very, very remarkable performance by the players, the coaches, and everybody behind the scenes at Celtic as well. Oops. Just a wee second. Pat McLaughlin, wonder if Yang will start. My memory is that he's probably unlikely to start for South Korea in their first game. However, our ex-striker O recently has been starting more often than not for South Korea, often playing up front alongside the Spurs player Son, who is the South Korean captain. So fairly good chance that the ex-Celtic player will be starting the game with Yang on the bench, and will be interesting to see, assuming Yang does get some game time over in America, how well that he does up against the top defenders in the world. I like Yang in a lot of ways. I think he's got a bit better every season. I think he's still got a lot of room to improve. However, he is only 23 years old. It's not as if he's into his mid-late 20s. He's still a relatively young player who's still got a lot of improving to do. He signed a new contract at the end of last season. He's a player that Martin O'Neill really likes a lot. I think Yang is a tremendously hard trier. I think he's also tried to adapt to the Scottish culture better than some of the other players. He is the only one of the Far Eastern players that we've got who does seem to speak English in interviews and English and in training more than the Japanese players do. So I like Yang's attitude. However, as I say, a lot of improving still to do. Great to have you, Cheryl Parry. It is certainly one of the worries, I think, with modern day football is it is becoming, to an extent, less and less of a contact sport, and more tackling is being outlawed. Now, it's not to say that the tackling when I was first watching football way back in the 70s and 80s, some of the tackling in the 70s and 80s and 60s was absolutely atrocious. So many old-fashioned football players with horrendous ankle injuries, knee injuries, leg injuries, broken legs, etc., because of the violent tackles. But I think the red card for tackles these days has gone too far the wrong way. 。 Pat McLaughlin going for France, Spain, Argentina, Brazil. I think you've certainly chosen at least three. Brazil, I'm not so certain about, but I do think France are going to be very, very strong. Spain are going to be very, very strong. Argentina, I think, are very, very strong. Brazil, I'm not so sure that they are as quite as whatchamacallit as consistent as they need to be. But they could be a team that just suddenly everything clicks for them. I just got a feeling that Argentina are quite a settled team. France and Spain are quite settled teams. Both those teams have got some superstars. All those three teams have got some superstars. They've also got some young players coming through to replace the older players. So I do think France, Spain, Argentina, if they do manage to avoid each other in the last 16, last 8, etc., could well be three of the four semi-finalists. Clashman Umpty, do you think Celtic will have a scout at the World Cup? I think Celtic probably will have 2 or 3 people at the World Cup. I think they'll also have quite a number of links to scouting agencies and so on. Celtic do have a South American and Central American specialist in their scouting team who does a lot of work over in that region for Celtic. And so I do think that Celtic will have probably a couple of scouts at least across there. I think there also will be a few ex-Celtic players who obviously are across there for TV and radio, people like Scott Brown, Joe Hart, etc. So I do think Celtic will have quite a number of other contacts. I think they will have a couple of scouts across there at least. They will have agents and other advisors out there already who are already based in North America and South America and Central America. Plus, they'll have some ex-players like Hart and Brown who also will be eyes and ears on the ground for them across in the 3 countries for the World Cup. Cheryl Parry, Argentina, France, Spain, England. Again, I read an awful lot of people predicting England to be one of the top 4. I'm not convinced that they've got the quality of players and the depth of squad to cope with the intensity of the World Cup and also the extreme heat of the World Cup. Eddie C. Yang's not consistent. I think that's a perfectly true point. However, he did end up being Celtic's 3rd top scorer last season, which has to mean something if you're 3rd top scorer behind Nygren on 21, Maeda on 7, and then you had Yang on 10. So, however, I completely agree. Yang needs to improve his consistency. Yang needs to improve his final ball. I think he's added a lot of things to his game in the last season under Nancy and then under Martin O'Neill that was never there before. I think he's added a ball-winning midfield role that he didn't have before. He was actually Celtic's 2nd most successful tackler last season, which again, for a winger, is actually quite an interesting stat. But I completely agree, Eddie C. I think he's got to improve another 25%. However, at the age of 23, and he's now got a contract for about 3 years at Celtic, he has got that capacity. But for me, next season, or this season coming rather, he should really be Celtic's 3rd choice wide player. We should have a definite number 1 on the left, number 1 on the right, with Yang and Chunek being the backups who can cover both the positions, and then Forrest as the backup to the backup to the backups until Jota comes back, and then hopefully Jota comes back and over a month or 2 becomes fully fit again. Hail to you, Paradise Provo. Fantastic. Yang would be quality in a slower league, and well, yes, I think Yang has several qualities. I think he's getting better and better. Um, um, but he's still got two or three more levels he's got to reach before he is good enough to be considered a Celtic first choice. For me, he's one of two wide players who should be on the bench for Celtic, coming on late in the game to give the better wide players a rest. I think it was part of one of the several things that Celtic got wrong last season was the fact that Chuneki and Yang ended up for many games being the first choice right-sided player and the first choice left-sided player, primarily because we had to move Dies and Maeda into the middle for quite a lot of last season, which in the end worked out really, really well. For me, and also, and I'm not saying that Yang is anywhere near as good as Dies and Maeda, and that Dies and Maeda gave Celtic something that Yang isn't able to do, i.e., Dies and Maeda could play centrally. However, there are quite a lot of parallels in terms of Dies and Maeda's last final touch, final cross, losing control of the ball, etc. That equates to them both. Maeda, much better player. However, Maeda is 6 years older than Yang. Maeda's been playing at international level for Japan for many, many years. So I think Maeda was a much more rounded player. However, even at the end of the season, Maeda was still missing quite a lot of crosses, losing the ball, dribbling, losing control of things. So I would love I would love Martin O'Neill to manage to negotiate with Dies and Maeda to keep him at the club another couple of years. However, I think at the age of 28, 29, it's probably time for Dies and Maeda to metaphorically spread his wings and go and play in a bigger, richer league for a few years prior to going back to finishing his career in Japanese football. Same way that I would expect over the course of this season, probably Kyogo to leave Birmingham and end up back playing for one of the J League clubs for a couple of years prior to retiring. NEC, very good, I think, in medical terms, sports physiology terms. I think that's an excellent point. You're saying you think we'll be lucky to see Super Jota in a Celtic top again. Pray you're wrong. The fact that he's been out for almost twice as long as they were initially predicting. I thought the initial prediction was he would be out for 9 months, or something. Yeah, something like 9 months. So back in around about December 25, January 26. I thought that was always a bit ambitious, in that most anterior cruciates take 10 to 12 months to get better. However, they're now suggesting up to 18 months for him to get better. And not playing football for 18 months, you lose an incredible amount of muscle bulk, strength, endurance, fitness, flexibility, all these things. So the fact that quite right. Anton Rogan's left foot, October, November, and the fact that he'll have been out from May of 25 all the way through to October, November 2026, which is going to be 18 months. That's a long, long time not to be playing football. It's a long, long time not to be properly training. As I say, he'll have lost an awful lot of muscle bulk, muscle endurance, stamina, and so on. Paradise Provo 56. I can see Martin O'Neill making a statement in Europe. The board own that. I can reportedly, Dermot Desmond has assured Martin O'Neill and assured Celtic that the funding will be there, the money will be there, that they're going to fund the renovations, rebuilding and refreshing that O'Neill wants to do. As I've said in previous comment sections and replies to other people, I'm not so convinced that the way for Celtic to rebuild their squad is lots of £10 million players, because I don't think players who are genuinely worth £10 million are wanting to come to play for Celtic or play in Scotland, because all of them have a far better pathway nowadays going into the bigger leagues: France, Germany, England, Spain, Italy, etc. I think, unfortunately, we've dropped down the list in terms of prestigious leagues. We're down a bit below Belgium, Holland, and Portugal. However, I think we can get really, really good quality players, probably from different markets. But I don't think Celtic have to break their transfer records necessarily to get the quality in. I think what they do need to do is open up the checkbook for contracts and bonuses and so on, because I think that is what will get Celtic the quality of players they require. And as I've mentioned before, Celtic are the biggest. They have the biggest wage budget for players by £5 million last season. Reportedly, it's going to be even bigger of a gap between Celtic and Rangers next season in terms of wage budgets. And Celtic also have the biggest wage budget for coaching staff, backroom staff, admin staff, non-playing staff, office staff, all these things. So Celtic are a high-paying club for players and for non-players, and all the different roles within the club. So my personal feeling is the way that Celtic will get the quality is by enticing players like Negrin, like Maeda, although obviously not those players, because we've already got Maeda, we've already got Negrin, and we're going to lose Maeda, but that sort of player. So when we got Maeda, Hatate, Kyogo, Alza Johnson to come from their leagues to play in Scotland, or Negrin and Engels to come and play in Scotland, all of them got good contracts, and with all those players, Celtic then gave them pay rises on a regular basis to keep them at the club as well. So Maeda, Hatate both got quite big upgrades on a couple of occasions. Alza Johnson's had a couple of big upgrades in his contract. So I think that's what Celtic need to do, is give lots of good contracts and bonuses and incentives, and also encourage loyalty to the club by regularly renegotiating their contracts. Slab and Cabbage, a couple of well-scouted 10 millions, with a majority of well-scouted 5-6 millions would be good rebuild. Engels transfer could possibly fund that alone. I think probably, I get your point. I think 10 million pounds is probably the ceiling of the type of player that we can get to come to the club. And probably if we were paying 10 million for the player, he's probably going to be a player who's worth about 5 or 6 million, but we're paying that extra to get them to come to Celtic, probably paying that a bit extra in terms of their contracts. Not massively convinced that the 9 million we spent on Adam Ida was buying a £9 million player. I think Ida 4 or 5 million would have been a much fairer price for him. I think Engels, for whom we paid 11 million, I think again, had we been buying Arnie Engels from a club in Japan or a club in America or a club in Scandinavia, we probably would have paid half as much for him to get exactly the same player. And again, Austin Trusty, we bought him from Sheffield United in the English Premier League or the English Championship. We spent 6 million on him. I think Trusty's probably worth 3 or 4 million. So what I'm kind of saying is, if we're buying from European leagues and from England, we're probably going to end up playing 3, 4, 5 million more than we need. But I think if we do sell Engels for 25 million to 30 million, we sell Maeda for 20 million, Hatate for 8 million, or whatever. I think certainly Celtic will have a big budget for buying players in, and giving them big wages. Kenneth Todd, yep. So we were talking about the story of what was being offered to Sean Maloney and Fotheringham. We don't actually know what is the truth or not truth, because there is no documentary proof to anything that that the Sun Sport or the Glasgow Herald journalist said. It was just their story. No backup, no documentation, no interviews, no statements, no emails, no text, no nothing, no actual concrete proof of this is what is actually going on. It was just them saying. What is going on behind the scenes? Who's looking at players coming in? My understanding was that over the course of January through to May, that Sean Maloney was working closely with the person who'd come from Chelsea. One of the head scouts at Chelsea had left Chelsea and come to Celtic. That corresponded roughly with the time that Paul Tidsdale was sacked, and so Sean Maloney and this ex-head scout at Chelsea had been working together from January through to May, scouting players, shortlisting players, running them past Martin O'Neill, discussing them in group meetings with the other coaches and stuff. So my understanding is that Celtic do have pre-existing good high-quality scouts. They also had the ex-Chelsea person who was being more of a head of scouting, head of recruitment type person. And I do think, I think Martin O'Neill's kind of for the last 2 or 3 weeks been away on holidays, but I think he also has had a pretty big influence on who's staying at Celtic and who's leaving Celtic. I think he was instrumental in the new contracts for Yang, for Forrest, for Scales and for McCowan. So I do think O'Neill has been working behind the scenes all the way from January through to current. And then although Martin O'Neill wasn't hands-on for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I'm sure there has been communications by phone, by email, by text, etc., between him and the powers that be who are at the club. The thing to remember also is the fact that, in essence, since the cup final onwards, the club to an extent has been on its holidays. The players are all on their holidays, apart from the players who are off doing international friendlies prior to the World Cup. So pretty much 3/4 of Celtic's squad at the moment are on their holidays. The coaches, the backroom staff, they're on their holidays. And so all football clubs around the world, the 3 or 4 weeks between the end of the Scottish football season and the transfer window opening in Scotland, which is Monday coming, most clubs have been on having a very quiet spell. So there's been at Rangers, I think, one signing. That was the Lawrence Shankland one. I think Lawrence Shankland moving from Hearts to Rangers was pre-arranged. I don't think it was anything that was negotiated. Hearts, as yet, haven't made any signings. They've released 3 or 4 players. They've got Craig Gordon and Cammy Devlin, who are both currently out of contract. They haven't signed any players so far. there's not actually been much movement all around the world in terms of players leaving clubs and transfers. Stephen Welsh is an exception to that because he was, in essence, a free agent player. So he was able to negotiate his contract with Swansea free of charge. Luis Palma has now moved from Celtic to Lech Poznan in Poland. Hatate Iheanacho is soon to move from Celtic to Tokyo. But I think the transfer of Welsh, Palma, and Hatate Iheanacho was all something that had been pre-agreed with Martin O'Neill when Martin O'Neill was still managing full-time up until the Cup final at the end of May. And I'm sure, and again, he's taking over from now. Slab and Cabbage, I hope Martin O'Neill's given every penny we make this summer and with a bit extra from our existing bank balance. Just don't trust the current setup to spend it wisely. Unfortunately, I think the problem with signing any football player from another club or another country or another league, it's always a risky venture. You can do all the scouting in the world, and a player can look really, really good playing for one club, and then he comes to play in Scotland and he doesn't fit in with the country, doesn't fit in with the climate, doesn't fit in with the language, doesn't fit in with his teammates. And then they leave Celtic and they become big stars at other clubs, or Celtic get a player that was no use at other clubs. They come to Celtic and suddenly they're the bee's knees. So a player like Nicholas Kuhn, who'd moved from club to club to club to club to club for years and years and years, never really settled anywhere. Suddenly he moves to Celtic and he has a really magnificent season for Celtic. He then goes to Italy and has a pretty awful season last season. So there's always a risk with signing any players, be it signing a player from England to come and play in Scotland, or coming from Europe or the Far East or Scandinavia. Always a risk. And with all the best wishes in the world, you never know a player is going to be great. So you can buy what you think is a really high quality player, and then they just don't turn out to be that. Or you buy a player, or you get a player for next to nothing, and he suddenly turns into a much better player than you think. Liam Scales, for an example, bought for next to nothing. He's become one of Celtic's regular players. I think Callum Osmond, who came to Celtic for absolutely nothing last summer because he was at the end of his contract with Fulham, I think he's going to be a really good player. And then wasted £5 million plus on Balaquisha. Whether Chineki turns into a really good quality player, still to be found out. So I think the money will be there to bring players in. Whether they succeed or don't succeed is largely down to them, also partly down to their teammates as well. In that players who are at the club, be it, let's say, Tierney, Carter Vickers, Johnston, Chineki, Yang, McGregor, and so on and so on. I think they also have to try and get these players integrated into the squad as well. And I don't think we did a terribly good job of that last summer. However, some players come into the club like Benjamin Negrin, and they scored 21 goals for Celtic last season, and his 21 goals last season were very, very important for helping Celtic get this far. Yep, Slab and Cabbage. Yep. So Shankland it came on a free transfer basically from Hearts to Rangers because he had a clause in his contract. He's been desperate to play for Rangers for years and years. So in essence, the deal that took Shankland from Hearts to Rangers was for nothing, which is also partly why they were able to announce it before the transfer deadline date, although his registration won't move from Hearts to Rangers until the 15th of June because that transfer can't get ratified until then. However, the Welsh one can get ratified straight away because he was out of contract. Jamie Brown letting Welsh terminate his contract with a year left done. Same with Incham, letting players go is mental. I think it was in the case of Welsh rather than Incham, I think it was basically a reward for Stephen Welsh having spent 18 years of his life as a Celtic player. So from the age of 8 through to now at the age of 26, he's been a Celtic player. He played 70 games for Celtic. He was a backup player for Celtic for the last 6 years. He played the odd game here and there. He was a pretty decent player for Celtic. A bit like Anthony Ralston, he seemed happy enough to be a backup player at Celtic. Went away on loan 3 times. So I think personally, in the case of Welsh, it was a bit of a reward, a loyalty gift to Welsh to let him leave a year early and negotiate his own transfer. I don't think Celtic would have got an awful lot of money for Stephen Welsh anyway. He was coming into the last year of his contract. You don't tend to get big transfer fees for players who are less than 12 months left in their contract. So I think that was the reason that Celtic let him go. I don't think they would have had a particularly good negotiation position with Welsh having under 12 months left of his contract to run. Which is why I think Celtic will cash in on Maeda this summer, assuming that O'Neill, etc., can't persuade him to stay at Celtic for another 2 or 3 years. However, I fully get your point. Possibly Celtic could have got a couple of £100,000 for Welsh from Swansea or Motherwell or whomever. But see, with him having 11 months left on his contract, and that would obviously steadily go down over the next few months, I think Celtic's bargaining chip with Stephen Welsh was going to get less and less by the month. So they let him go a bit early, and he's got himself a new job for 2 years at Swansea. So that sounds very good from Jamie Brown there. Shanklin is a 5-head rather than a 4-head, certainly. To be fairly fair to Shanklin, he's actually looked really good for Scotland so far in the friendlies we've had. Curacao and against Bolivia, although it was against Curacao and it was against Bolivia. We will be playing, obviously, a stronger version of Curacao when we play Haiti, and we'll playing a stronger version of Bolivia when we play Brazil. Although my memory was that Bolivia came 7th in the South American qualifying group, and Brazil came 6th, and it was the top 6 that qualified. So there wasn't much of a gap between Bolivia and Brazil actually in the qualifying table in terms of position. There was one position of a gap, but there was something like 6 or 8 points between them. But Bolivia technically are the 7th best team in South American football, and Scotland thumped them in the friendly, and that was partly Thank you, Alison Timberley. I am trying to filter the sensible comments and the less sensible comments, but some of them I'm all for. A bit of fun. It is, as I say, it's a bit of an empty spell in that there's not an awful lot of stuff going on at Celtic. We've now got an established manager for the season. My guess at this point is that Celtic will have O'Neill not just for this season but also next season. So I think we'll have him for a couple of years. I think the 26-27 season will be a success for Celtic. At this point, I would be predicting Celtic to win the double or the treble next season. I think Celtic certainly got the capacity, definitely, to qualify for the Champions League, and then do much as they did do in the 24-25 season, i.e. get into the last 24, the knockout stage. I think Celtic, that certainly, with a few additions to the squad and some very clever management and better preparation, I think Celtic will get through the qualifier this time around and do much of the same as they did a couple of seasons ago in the Champions League, and get themselves into the first playoff round, the first knockout round of the Champions League. Would be my prediction. Now, obviously, that's going to be partly on Celtic doing a good job of replacing players over the summer, and a good job of those who stay behind. So probably a core of maybe 7 or 8 of Celtic's best 11 starters will still be at the club next season. So I think we will lose Maeda and Hatate and Engels. So probably, given the way that Celtic were for most of the second half of the season, that would be losing 2 players who were regular first choice starters. Hatate, for much of the Martin O'Neill second 6 months, was a player off the bench rather than a regular starter. Although, for me, Hatate should have always been the first midfielder off the bench. Quite how he got beneath Luke McCowan in the pecking order for midfielders, I'll never know. But maybe Hatate's attitude, maybe Hatate and O'Neill didn't really get on. Thank you, Kieran Allen, for what I think is a compliment. I do, and anybody who's been following the channel for the last, will be 3 years in August. It will be 3 years since I started this channel. I do always try and be super optimistic, super positive. I don't tend to be awfully negative. I don't tend to see the bad side of stories. I always try and see the positives, be it about the boardroom, the finances, the club, the supporters, the players, the coaches, the everything. The only thing I've got a negative vibe about is the standard of journalists, particularly the newspaper journalists, and the way that they cover Celtic. I do think there is that there is a deliberate effort for, I think, the print journalists to find ways to write negative stories about Celtic. It's very rare to see a really positive story from in the written press in Scotland. Most of the positive stories coming out about Celtic these days come out from Celtic's own YouTube channels and Celtic's own media people. There should be a lot more positivity in terms of the newspaper stories. Quite interesting. Another person I was talking to earlier today, who isn't a particular football fan, was very, very surprised at the negativity of the stories that she was reading regarding Celtic at the moment, online, through the BBC, through Sky, and so on and so forth. She reads a lot of newspapers. She reads a lot of stuff online, a lot of social media stuff as well. And she was quite surprised at how negative the coverage of Celtic has been for the last year or so, where she's been particularly watching it. Wyoming CSC, to be fair, there was criticism because we were doing poorly on the pitch and off it. That I have no problem at all with journalists and pundits and TV stations being negative if Celtic played badly. The point I was trying to make was, I think that there are a lot of stories being written in the press which have got no foundation and no evidence to back them up. It's just opinion pieces. Rather than news pieces. So for me, a news story should be backed up by clear, proper evidence that people can look at and cross-examine. So if you think about this is just an analogy, but if you think about a court case where the prosecution presents evidence, the defense produces evidence, and the jury can look at the evidence, or the judge can look at the evidence, or the sheriff can look at the evidence in a Scottish case, and then people can cross-examine witnesses and speak to witnesses and look at video things and look at pictures, look at reports and get other people's opinions, and then you weigh it up and you come to a conclusion in a court case, guilty or not guilty, or that side wins a civil case, that side loses a civil case. And again, if we were thinking about an essay at school or university, you put down your thoughts, you give the evidence, and then the person who marks your story says, or your essay says, yep, these are 10 good bits of evidence that support your theory. So well done. The thing is, an awful lot of stories in the Scottish sports press have got no evidence to back them up. So if the journalists were actually producing documentary proof, emails, phone calls, reports, statements, inside documents, financial reports, contracts, etc., but they're not. None of these things are ever produced to back up whatever's being said about the negotiations with Fotheringham and Maloney. It's all just contention. And as I said, Sean Maloney has a contract already with Celtic, which he would either have to honour or he would have to resign. He has a contract with Celtic pre-existing, whether he's a coach or whether he is going back to the job he had before. Good point, Eddie C. That I think the Hearts and Rangers last season probably had their best chance for 5 years or so. Going back to obviously to Stephen Gerrard's Rangers team beat Celtic in the 2021 season. So I think that was probably the best chance any team had to beat Celtic in a league season. Since that time, that season obviously was a bit of a disaster for a lot of reasons. The 2021 season under Lennon, then Kennedy. I think Celtic did a great job of rebuilding under Postecoglou. I think things kind of trickled along under Rodgers for a couple of seasons, and then last season went downhill. And I think last season was a definite great chance for definitely a big chance for Hearts and Rangers to win the title. And if we think going into the last 6 or 7 games of the season, Celtic at that point were third place. A lot of people had Rangers as the favourites, with Hearts as second favourite, and Celtic thought to be coming into third place. And O'Neill, the coaches and the players turned things around brilliantly from the Dundee 2-1 win onwards after the international break. And the Celtic's form got better and better. The results got better and better. Hearts and Rangers started to falter. So I do agree, Eddie C. I think, personally, I think last season, the season just ended, was the best chance those two had of overtaking Celtic in Scottish football. I think Celtic will get stronger and stronger for the next couple of seasons. I don't think Rangers will get stronger and stronger. I don't think Hearts will get stronger and stronger. I think Hearts are going to lose quite a lot of their better players. I don't think their scouting system's actually that good for replacing them. I think Rangers will end up selling a lot of players to buy players this summer. I don't think they've got the budget, having spent 40 million last season, and winning absolutely nothing, and Hearts obviously last season won absolutely nothing. Celtic won 2 trophies, St Mirren won the other, and I would suspect that Hearts won't get through the first round or two of the Champions League qualifying games. I suspect they might well drop into the Europa League or the Conference League. But I don't really see them being that strong next season. Pat McLaughlin, half the Hearts team is going to end up at Ibrox with McInnes and Schrankenstein. I think there's a good chance of that. They're reportedly Red Bull Salzburg are scouting, possibly getting Danny Roll to be their manager next season. There were a couple of German league clubs looking at Danny Roll as well. I would not be the least bit surprised if Roll does end up going back to Germany or back to Austria, to Red Bull Salzburg this summer. I don't think he's got any particular ties or loyalty to Rangers. I don't think many players anymore at Rangers have actually any loyalty to the club. I think probably the last of the players who had a real loyalty to the club was James Tavernier, and he's gone. Possibly Butland maybe has a degree of loyalty, maybe Suter, maybe Connor Barron, but I don't think there's an awful lot of loyalty or love of the football club. I think it's just a whole lot of mercenaries that Rangers have got in their team. At least Celtic do seem to have quite a lot of players who buy into the ethos and the history of Celtic. And then that partly, for me, is down to people like Martin O'Neill, McManus, Fotheringham, Maloney, Forrest, McGregor, Ralston, Tierney, etc. And also newer players like Alistair Johnston. I think those sorts of players are massively important. Wyoming C would rather Gerrard didn't go back. They're not saying he'd beat us, but he'd make them better. I think, this personal opinion, I think Steven Gerrard had a pretty decent squad at Rangers, and he got Celtic at a very poor time for Celtic. I think football also was very messed up at that point with all the COVID restrictions with training, crowds, all these types of things as well. I don't think Steven Gerrard is a particularly good manager. He went on to be a rather poor manager at Aston Villa, rather poor manager in Saudi football, which is why he got sacked by Villa and then resigned in Saudi. I don't think he's a particularly particularly good manager. He maybe does have a bit of draw for players to come to play for him because of how brilliant a footballer he was when he was an actual player, but I don't think he's actually a particularly good manager, as opposed to Martin O'Neill, who was a very good manager. He also has a degree of ability to bring players into the club who may not have chosen to come to the club, but also I think O'Neill, very, very, very bright, intelligent man, very good tactician, very, very good at man management, and very good at building teamwork and team cohesion and building a whole lot of players and bring them together all to fight off the same hymn sheet, metaphorically. Slab and Cabbage, do I think that Rangers will get what they want when it comes to recruiting managers and players? Again, I don't think Rangers have a particular any power these days to recruit top level players, top level managers. I don't think it's like the old days where Rangers were spending hundreds of millions of pounds that they didn't have, which eventually made them go completely bankrupt, to bring some of the best players in Europe and some of the best players in the UK to play for Rangers. So for many, many years, Rangers did have really top quality managers, Advocat, Walter Smith, etc. They had some super players that came to play for them in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, etc. But in the end, it bankrupted them. And I don't think, partly because of that, but also partly because Scottish football isn't nearly as attractive or prestigious as it used to be in terms of player recruitment. I don't think that's going to be. I don't think Rangers are going to be. I don't think Rangers have got the power prestige to be a top recruiting team for players or managers. NEC, only because of COVID was it not that we missed our fan base. I think the COVID seasons, couple of seasons were very mixed up, very complicated. I think there was a lot of rules and regulations. I think the lack of fan support was a big factor. I think also that having Celtic having won the title 9 years in a row, you do need to keep on refreshing and rebuilding the squad and making. And I think there was also quite a lot of staleness in that squad as well. A few players in that Neil Lennon squad in 2021 who were looking to move on to other clubs. Ryan Christie, Christopher Ayer, Odson Edward, etc., etc. I think there were quite a number of players who were probably feeling that they'd stayed at Celtic for one season too much. They were itchy feet to get off and play in England or play in France, etc. And I think Celtic probably that season would have been better to have let those three players go and try to get in players to replace them straight away. Then that might have kept on the squad being refreshed and moving on. Yeah, fantastic. I do. I think it's. I do think the World Cup in America has been massively over commercialized, extremely expensive, and I think FIFA should have been getting the ticket prices down at a level where common or garden normal football fans could afford it. I think there are certainly some tickets for the various different games which are $60, $80, which is a bit on the high side, but it's at least it's within the budget of many football fans, particularly in that they may have been saving up for months and months or years and years to go to this World Cup. But tickets that are costing $500, $1,000, $10,000, $20,000, as is the case, is just absolutely ridiculous. And whilst paying $500 or $1,000 isn't unusual for playing for games in the playoffs or the Super Bowl or the World Series in American sports, your basic tickets don't cost $500 to $1,000 to go and watch a normal season game in American football or ice hockey or basketball or baseball. Quite a number of years ago, our family went out for a holiday in the Boston area. It was a brilliant holiday. But we got tickets for one of the Boston Red Sox baseball games for $7 each. So we went and then got really good seats for about $25. So the ticket prices in American sport are not excessive for normal common or garden league games, season games, etc. The playoffs are massively overpriced, but the ticket pricing is excessive. The hotels are excessive. The transport's excessive, plus all the governmental influence and border patrols and customs and excise and immigration. It's ruined the World Cup for me. So hopefully my family and friends who are out there come home safe, come home with still some money in their back pockets. Got a family member who's out there, and I got a close friend from when I was working who's out there as well. So hopefully they both come home safe and sound and still with money in their back pocket. Yeah, the next World Cup is interesting in that they're having over three different venues in 3 different continents. So it's an interesting mix, and hopefully it gets back to a bit more back to football being the most important thing, and making hundreds of millions of dollars of profit. And all this nonsense that Infantino was going on about all the money that's made at the World Cup will go back into the game. A complete and utter nonsense. A lot of it is going to go into the big businesses and stadium owners, particularly in all around America. A lot of money is going to go into state governments, the federal government in America as well. So I think FIFA personally have priced themselves out the market. Infantino was saying that the ticket sales have been brilliant. That's not what I've been hearing. I've been hearing that a lot of the stadiums are about are going to be half empty, or one third's empty when it actually gets to the game, because people can't afford the prices, and there's not actually that much interest in games that are not involving America. There's not much interest in games involving quite a number of the countries who are going to be there this summer. It's a very interesting point, Jamie Brown. It's not a working class sport anymore. I think football still is. I think football at its heart, at its core, is still very much a working class sport. I think, unfortunately, that it has been hijacked by millionaires and billionaires. It's been hijacked by big money. I think there's a lot to be said for football clubs being owned by the supporters or being owned by the community. I think there's the fact that most of the big clubs in England, especially, are owned by Americans, owned by Qataris, Saudis, etc. I think that is a major problem. And I think there should be an awful lot more community ownership and a lot more fan ownerships of football clubs. And I think that would probably get football a bit back to the good old days. I do think honestly, also, with the amount of money that there is there in football from the Champions League, sponsorship, TV money, etc., you do need to be sound, clever businessmen, which I don't think really was the case at Celtic or any football club in Scotland until Fergus McCann came into the club in the mid-90s. I think he got Celtic to be a well-managed business and a well-managed football club. And then I think thereafter it's a balancing act of being financially secure and financially well-managed, but also allowing the football club to be a better and better football club. And I think the two things go together. So I do think good financial management, good management of the money, good deals with sponsors, merchandising, TV, etc., all very, very important. But I do think there does need to be at the heart of all football clubs, football and the fans, and less so making money. Sorry. Ernest Mosley saying every football fan should read the great David Yallop book, How They Stole the Beautiful Game. Not a book that I've actually read. But I do agree. I do agree that I'm all for football becoming a 21st century sport. I'm all for it developing. I'm all for football clubs to be well managed financially. As I say, 32 years ago, Celtic were within a few hours or at least a day or two of going completely out of business. So I do think good financial management is very, very, very important. And I do think there does need to be a bit of speculation and accumulation. So I do think you do need to spend money to keep on improving. So I do think Celtic over this course of this summer will look to try to move the club on. I think they'll try to get back to where we were 2 seasons ago in terms of European success, i.e. into the Champions League and then through to the first knockout stage, and then trying to build on that next season by going one step further. Whether Celtic or any club from Celtic's standard of league can get much past the last 16 is another matter, in that it's very, very rare these days that a team outside of the big 5 leagues can get into the last 8 or beyond. But I think with continuity of players, continuity of management, and a good conveyor belt of players coming through the club over the next 3 or 4 seasons, anything's possible. And I do think Martin O'Neill's a good starting point to starting to that. No, Pat McLaughlin, I'm not seeing the Bernard Ponsonby interview with Peter Martin. To be thoroughly fair, I don't particularly rate Peter Martin as a pundit, as a football expert. I did watch his football show a wee bit for a few weeks, but I kind of got turned off of it. I didn't particularly like a lot of his opinions. Didn't really particularly like the opinions of Tam McManus, the ex-Hibs player, Alan Ruff, a bit boring. Thought Peter Martin quite liked being self-important and implying that he was the expert on everything and knew all the inside gossip and all inside stories of all the football clubs in Scotland. So no, I haven't watched his interview with Bernard Ponsonby and Peter Martin. Gordon Flowers, great to have you all the way from Australia. Have a punt on the World Cup, South Korea to beat the Czechs today. I think that's a good bet. I think South Korea have got some super players. They've got players pretty much playing in all the biggest leagues all around Europe. I think they are a team that could produce quite a number of surprises. I think at this World Cup there will be a fair number of teams who are going to end up 4th in their groups and never really have a chance of getting out the group. I think there are some teams like South Korea who could produce a shock or two. I can easily see South Korea going deep into the competition. I don't think they'll get really deep into the competition like they did when the World Cup was at home for them and Japan a number of years ago. But I do think they could be a bit of a surprise. Tontastic only 3 hours to the next game. I think that's the only one of the other wee snags to the World Cup being in Canada, Mexico, and United States of America is a lot of the games are going to be at rather inconvenient times. Slapping cabbage. I cannot stand Peter Martin. As I say, for maybe a month or so, I did watch the PLZ Soccer. I think that's what their channel was called. I started to get more and more annoyed, more and more frustrated, and I thought they're just making things up. He's claiming that he knows experts, and he's got all the inside gossip from Brendan Rodgers and from Felipe Colamonte and so on and so on and so forth, and he's best mates with everybody. But I didn't really get. I kind of went off of him. Didn't know that Peter Martin was a Celtic supporter. Well, from watching his channel for a few weeks, I certainly never particularly got the fact that he was a Celtic supporter. He claimed, I think, to have inside knowledge and inside sources at Celtic, and they never really seemed to come to pass. And quite a lot of the stories that he broke as going to happen at Celtic never actually happened. So. Yep, I think Korea's got good players playing all around Europe. One current Celtic player in their squad, one ex-Celtic player in their squad, and some players who are playing in the big leagues in England and Germany and Holland and Belgium and Italy and Spain and so on. So I think they actually are a stronger team. I think much like Japan. I think Japan could be another team that goes deep into the competition too. Good points, Sean South, Gary Owen, Sligo Boy. I'll settle for the Champions League this season to coincide with our 60th anniversary. Yep. It will be. Yep, will be next May. Will be 60 years since the glorious day in Lisbon when we beat Inter Milan 2-1. A couple of months later, almost as good day when I was born, 2 months or so after the Lisbon Lions won the European Cup in '67. So obviously big memorial or anniversary next May time, when it will be 60 years since the Lisbon Lions. So hopefully Celtic and Scottish football and UEFA do something to celebrate the 60-year anniversary of the Lisbon Lions, and because it was actually a big day for Scottish football, big day for British football when a British team, a Scottish team, won the European Cup for the first time, and obviously. In terms of a Scottish team, the only time a Scottish team has won the top European competition. And I think, unfortunately, probably the one and only time a Scottish team is going to win the top competition in Europe. Can't see, unfortunately, that wherever a Scottish team's ever going to be able to get to the quality class, except to take on an English Premier League club, a Serie A, La Liga team or a Bundesliga team to win the ultimate trophy. Slabbing cabbage. Is that how Baldy Belgian's name is pronounced? I don't know. For some reason, I've always thought of Felipe Colamonte as Felipe Colamonte. It probably is something completely different. The same as people were thinking that I was saying Elijah Just's name. In a funny fashion, it just, in essence, for some reason in my head, Felipe Clement has always been Felipe Colamonte. Anyway, No, I think so. So NEC, I think the players are still working class players, but very quickly, if they become successful, they become multimillionaires. I think at the grassroots, if you think about players who are playing for East Fife or Cowdenbeath or Albion Rovers or for Stenhouse Muir or East Stirling and all these sort of clubs who are in the bottom divisions or the East of Scotland League, or the ones playing in the Highland League. I think it's still very much a working class game for all those people. I think when you get into the Scottish Championship, it's still, in terms of the quality of players and the people that go to watch it, still a working class sport. I think the fans of football are still very much a working class sport, but I do think the money in football has in some ways improved the game, and also in some ways I think it's corrupted the game and made the game worse. And I think to an extent the football is being priced out the budgets of the common man, unfortunately. Ah, dear. Anyway, a couple of very interesting, entertaining comments there, but I think unfortunately I can't really put it up. Yes, I think John Brown's comment about it being corrupt, I think he was answering a different point, and again, I think he was, as is so often the case, talking nonsense. I'm a great believer in football players making mistakes, football managers making mistakes, referees making mistakes, and board members and executives make mistakes. I think everybody in football, and everybody in life for that matter, makes mistakes. So it's understandable if a football player misses a goal or a goalkeeper lets the ball in. It's equally understandable if a manager picks the wrong tactics, picks the wrong players. I think also in terms of recruiting players, scouting players, it's always open to making mistakes because life is very difficult to predict. Ronnie McNearney, Daily Record reporting role to leave. Role to leave Rangers. Certainly, I don't know if it's bad news for Celtic or good news for Celtic. I don't think personally it makes terribly much difference who Rangers manager is. I don't think they've got the prestige now to attract a top level manager, as was proven last time around when they ended up having Danny Rowe, a manager who'd had a bit of success managing Sheffield Wednesday, but it was Sheffield Wednesday. It wasn't as if they attracted a manager from a big club in Europe or attracted him from a top English Championship or an English Premier League club. It was a manager coming from Sheffield Wednesday, a team that was out and basically bankrupted itself. NEC think it will be at least 5 years to get us back qualifying for the last 16. I think the problem also is next season and the season after that, whoever the Scottish champions are, which I would strongly favour Celtic to be the champions of Scotland next season and the season after, is we're going to be entering in probably the second round of qualifying, not the fourth round of qualifying. So we'll have 3 games to win to get into the Champions League, as opposed to this season and last, where we had one set of a 2-legged tie to get through. So I think next season, so not the season that's about to start, but the season after that, and so 27, 28 and 28, 29 are going to be a lot more difficult for Celtic to qualify through the Champions League, simply because we'll be starting in early July rather than mid-August. which will really, really mess up Celtic's pre-season, especially if there's a international competition like the Copa America or the European nations going on at the same time. I think it's really going to make it really difficult for Celtic to qualify for the Champions League after next and the Champions League after that. Yep. Ernest Mosley, Russell Martin still available for them. Did see rumours that he was being lined up to be manager, I think possibly of Leicester. Also, on a slightly similar but different topic, a couple of teams reportedly are lining up Wilfred Nancy to be their manager next season in the top division in France. Lorient being one of the two clubs apparently who have got a contract offer for Wilfred Nancy for next season. Lorient, one of the sort of mid-table teams in the top French division. And interestingly, that's actually where our rather disappointing loan players, Joel and Vuka, will be going back to play. So it'll be interesting to see if Nancy does get that job with Lorient, whether he turns Lorient back into a successful club and whether he can turn Mvuka back into a successful player, because he certainly was far from successful at Celtic in his two bits of a game. Good evening to you, Chipper67. Hopefully you've had a nice evening out and you're all refreshed and happy coming into the live stream just about 11:30. Good evening to you. Everything has been, from my point of view, it's been a very good-spirited, friendly, happy chat amongst Celtic fans and football fans. Yep, fantastic. Yep, I had a feeling it was Leicester, who I think are going to be in the English First Division next season. They've had quite a downturn in their form, which was, of course, started with Brendan Rodgers. He took them from being a top 6 club and FA Cup winners to being a bottom of the table team. They never really recovered after sacking him. And I think they then got relegated a couple of seasons later into the English Championship. And I think last season they got relegated out of it. No, I didn't see Haiti playing against New Zealand, but if Haiti beat New Zealand 4-0, and remembering that England only beat New Zealand 1-0, I think Haiti are a more than decent club. They've got a few players who play in Major League Soccer, and they've got lots of players who play in countries like France, Switzerland, Belgium, and so on. They do actually have, I think, a lot of quality players, and they have quite a lot of players who are French origin or French nationality, French parentage, grandparentage, etc. So they actually do have they actually have a lot of quality, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be a difficult game for Scotland on Sunday. And you're quite right. I think they do have a player who is part of Sunderland's Premier League squad. Yep, Gordon Flowers. Haiti had a big, strong team. I think there's a lot more quality in their team than people are giving them credit for. It's thought that Haiti are a wee bit better than Curacao. Scotland, of course, beat Curacao 4-1 in a friendly. Whether that would have been the result had Curacao not had a player sent off late in the first half, I'm not so sure. However, the bulk of the Curacao team are Dutch players playing in Holland, some playing in England, some playing all around the world. So I do think that Haiti will be far from a pushover. It's not like the very first World Cup that I saw, which was back in West Germany, 1974. Scotland had to play Zaire, who were called Zaire at that time. They're now called the Democratic Republic of Congo. At that point, African football was very, very weak. Scotland only managed to beat them by a couple of goals, which in the end is what knocked us out the competition. I think the days of countries from Africa, Asia, Oceania, etc., being weak teams is way, way gone. I think Australia could be a strong team, possibly not quite as strong as they were under Ange Postecoglou's managership, but I think they're a team with a lot of quality. I think they could cause some surprises, and I think this is probably the World Cup where a team from Africa could go even deeper into the competition. Morocco obviously have done really well in the past. I think they are another possibility of and another team that could go deep into the competition and being a bit of a surprise. Chipper67, Davey was trying to say to Quinny on Axom, Francolino, striker from Michelin, 22 goals in 34, young African striker. Should we be offering 10 to 12 million for this lad? He looks very impressive. I think the problem is that if Francolino is attracting that much interest, scoring 22 goals in 34 games, I think there's going to be a lot more clubs in bigger, richer leagues who are looking to sign him rather than Celtic. So I think probably stepping up from the Danish Super League to the Scottish Premier League is probably a wee bit of a step up in terms of quality. So that would be an attractive point for him. Playing in Europe in the Champions League would be an attractive point for him as well. However, I do think probably if he's that good and scoring that prolifically, he's probably more likely to end up moving to England, Italy, Spain, Germany, etc., rather than moving to come and play in Scotland. But one of the things that certainly players like Francolino should bear in mind is if they do sign for Brentford or Bournemouth or Crystal Palace or whatever, they may well end up being on the bench, much like Matt O'Reilly ended up being on the bench quite a bit for Brighton, then getting loaned out to a couple of different clubs. I think it's always one of the risks if you do move from being a first-team regular at a team in Denmark, let's say. What's your chances of being a first-team regular starter if you do move to one of the big 5 leagues in Europe? So I think there is always a balancing for players like that to balance. Do I want to play in a bigger league, or do I want to play regular first-team football to try and keep on improving my career, improving my squad, my earning potential? I would be very, very happy if players like that chose to come and play for Celtic in Scotland for 2 or 3 seasons and then moved, a bit like Maeda is doing, a bit like Matt O'Reilly did, etc., etc. When they are that wee bit more experienced, having given Celtic 2 or 3 very good years, then we can let them move on for big profits to the bigger leagues. I think at the moment, too many young players are choosing the big money of the big leagues and not choosing to necessarily progress their career. So Gordon Flowers saying he thinks Maeda shaved his head again. Seen him training with his team and he was baldy again. My understanding is that the reason Maeda grew his hair back out is because his daughter didn't like him having such short hair. Didn't like having such short hair, so she made her dad grow grow his hair back out again. So maybe now that he's away from his daughter's influence and across in America, that he's shaved his head again. Yep, Gordon Flowers. I think that's for anybody who's got kids of their own, even if they are, in my case, older aged, and moved out of the house to start her own life. Kids are still massively important. You do need to do what they tell you. Great to have you on, San Fran Celtic. Hail to you, and hail to all the other lads and lassies watching and participating and chatting and discussing things tonight. Sean South, Gary Owen, I give little hope for most European teams this World Cup. I do have a strong fancy for Spain and France to be able to cope with the high heat of playing in North America this summer. I do think the teams from Central America and South America do have an advantage. Probably the teams from Africa have an advantage as well. I do think that France and Spain have got the quality. Not so convinced that England's players, German players, Dutch players will cope so well with the heat, even though they will have clever scientists and physiologists and doctors and trainers and physios to. Chipper 67. I think France have better players than Spain, but Spain have a better work ethic and play as a team. I think there's a lot of truth to that as well, and I think people do underestimate the importance of playing as a team. I think that's what got Celtic through at the end of last season, was that Martin O'Neill, McGregor, Tierney, etc., got the players all playing as a team. I think also, my own personal opinion is that the return into the team of Alistair Johnston was also a big factor in helping Celtic play better as a team. I think he is an on-pitch leader better than many players that Celtic have got at the moment. I think he's also a very intelligent player. I think he's also a good man motivator and good man manager, Alistair Johnston. So I do think that there were a lot of factors at the end of last season, which is why Celtic won the title, won the cup, whilst Rangers and Hearts were falling away in the last 2 months of the season. Celtic got better and better and better after the last international break. So we went into that international break having lost 2-0 to Dundee United. We came back after a couple of weeks away on the international break, and Celtic were perfect 100% after that, starting with the Dundee 2-1 game and then winning game after game after game. Not always playing particularly good football, but in all the games from then until the end of the season, finding a way to win the game, be it a last-minute penalty like against Motherwell, be it scoring 4 in extra time like it was against St Mirren. Trevor 67, hope that the ref hasn't set a precedent for red cards. Thought the second and third were borderline. Haven't actually seen the game between the two, the opening game of the World Cup. So I will be watching that after we finish the live stream. Just watch the highlights. So Gordon Flowers, Chipper, just watch the highlights, and I can concur. The last 2 red cards were a bit harsh. I do think that the best referees, the best umpires, the best officials in in games tend to be the ones who let the game just flow and just go. I think a lot of referees these days in all the various different sports around the world get a wee bit rule bound, and I do think it can. San Fran Celtic, did Yang make the Korean squad? Yep, Yang is across in North America with the South Korean squad. He's liable to be one of the players they use late in the game off the bench. Our ex-Celtic player, Hyun Oh, he will be could be a starter for South Korea, certainly will be the first striker off the bench. If he's not starting the game, he's obviously had a very successful time in Belgian football, very successful time in Turkish football, and he did start a few of their friendlies over the course of the last 6 months with the South Korean squad. So he's kind of got himself into being one of the regular starters, and if he's not starting the game, he's tended to be the first striker off the bench later in the game. So Yang, liable to be one of the wide players they use later in the game. Gordon Flower-Yang's been in the squad but hasn't featured yet in the friendlies. I think part of that was the fact that his season for Celtic ran right into the last week in May, and so I think he was given a bit of a rest, much like the same way that a couple of the Celtic players were given a rest by Stevie Clarke at the start of Scotland's friendlies leading into this World Cup. So Wyoming CSC, does Balikwisha still get a game for the Democratic Republic of Congo? He did play 2 or 3 games for them. However, when the Democratic Republic of Congo were involved in the playoffs to get to this World Cup, he wasn't part of the squad. I think his brother or cousin is still part of that squad, but Balikwisha, mostly because he wasn't playing for Celtic, so understandably his country wasn't going to put him in the side if he wasn't getting regular football for Celtic. There was no point in putting him in the side to play in their World Cup qualifiers and their World Cup itself. So I don't think Balikwisha is in the Congo squad, but I could be wrong. My understanding, the Celtic players who are away at the World Cup are Ralston and Tierney for Scotland, Nygren for Sweden, Chineke for Tunisia, Yang for Korea, and Maeda for Japan. I think that's all the Celtic players away. So Chipper67 agree would move Yang on if we can get some money. I think the fact that Martin O'Neill and Celtic gave Yang a new 3-4 year contract at the end of last season, I don't think Celtic are looking to move Yang on at this point. I think they're looking to get another 2 or 3 years of good work and improvement out of Yang, and then maybe selling him when he gets into his mid-20s. He's only 23 years old now, so he's still got, for me, another 2 or 3 years of getting better and better. I think Yang made a lot of progress last season, still has a lot of... Couldn't agree more. I think it's a brilliant point, San Fran Celtic. Yang is a hard worker. That's hard to find. I do agree that players with his attitude, now his standard of play, his quality isn't as good as it needs to be, but let's say 10 goals last season. More than decent output for a wide player. His assists were just 2, which obviously needs to improve a lot. Yeah, Chipper 67. Do I think that Yang has earned his place in the starting 11, or is a squad player? Personally, a squad player for me, but I'd like to hear. But yes, so I think part of Celtic's problem is last season. We are at the end of the season. More often than not, our starting wide player on the right was Yang, and our starting wide player on the left was Sebastian Chinecki. And for me, on their current abilities and their current outputs and form, Chinecki and Yang should be our 2 backup wingers with a regular first choice right winger and a regular first choice left-sided wide player. So I do think you're entirely right. I think Yang and Chinecki should be backup wide players with a designated better quality person ahead of them. So ideally last season, Celtic should have had Maeda as a wide player on the left and a Nicholas Kuhn-like player on the right, or Jota on the right. Kuhn obviously moved on. Jota was injured all last season. But I do think you're quite right. I think Yang and Chinecki are, at this point, probably squad players. I think both Chinecki and Yang are young enough and have enough talent and potential to get better and better over the next couple of seasons. And so they could turn into be a first choice player. But for me at the moment, they're both backup players. So you're entirely right. They're backup players. And part of the problem last season was for most of the season, Yang and Chinecki ended up being our first choice wide players. Really good point, Gordon Flowers. Someone should tell Yang just to go for it. The goal he scored against Rangers, when he ran at them, super goal. He scored some really good, important goals for Celtic last season. He scored the goal that put us 2-1 up against Hearts away from home. That game ended up 2-2, largely due to the rather harsh, controversial sending off of Austin Trusty. But Yang scored some important goals for us last season, some great goals for us last season. Scored a big goal for Celtic when he scored the first goal of Martin O'Neill's second spell last season. So he was the one that scored the first goal for Celtic after Wilfred Nancy was sacked. And the goal he scored against Rangers, possibly one of Celtic's best goals last season. I think possibly one would argue the best goal that Celtic scored last season until the Dyson Maeda overhead kick against Rangers in that 3-1 win. So I do think there's a lot of talent in Yang's boots, but a real inconsistency. But for me, he's got a big heart and he tries as hard as he can. And I think that's something you can't really coach. Good point, Sam fan. Celtic, Yang's twice the player as he was last season. I think that's a pretty reasonable opinion. His goal tally massively increased from about 6 the season before to 10 last season. I still think his assists should be better than it was. Just 2 last season. Celtic didn't actually get an awful lot of assists from the wide players last season. James Forrest all season, 1 goal and 2 assists. And we've got quite a lot of assists actually from our fullbacks, be it Tierney, Donovan, Johnston, Orojo, etc. And I think that's an area that Celtic can certainly work on. And I'm hoping that we get a player or two who are comfortable playing out wide to take over as being our first and second, our first choice right side wide player and our first choice left wide player, assuming that Maeda leaves as expected. Wyoming CSC is saying, is Oxlade-Chamberlain and Kelechi staying? I've got a funny feeling that both of them will be leaving simply because they want to move back to English football. Oxlade-Chamberlain apparently getting married to his long-standing fiancée this weekend. Been engaged for 4 years. Apparently his fiancée and soon-to-be wife actually enjoyed her time in Glasgow with them, so maybe Oxlade-Chamberlain does come back to be a Celtic player next season. There have certainly been negotiations and moves to bring Kelechi Iheanacho back to Celtic for another season. They did have, with both Kelechi Iheanacho and Oxlade-Chamberlain, a 1-year option that they could exercise this summer if both Celtic and the player wants it. So I don't know. I don't think in the end Oxlade-Chamberlain quite showed enough for Celtic to definitely get a new contract with Celtic. However, one has to remember that he hadn't played football from May of 2025 all the way through to January of 2026. So he had spent 8 months out of football. So and just training with Arsenal and so on. So maybe with a proper pre-season, both he and Kelechi Iheanacho do become the players that they used to be, or the players that they could be. Kieran Allen, Celtic will improve the squad under O'Neill. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm pretty sure of that as well. And it's great that somebody is nice and optimistic like me. Park McLaughlin, Osman, Iheanacho as the backups. I'm fine with. Yes. That would be a great scenario. I think Osmond, for me, in a year or two's time, could be a really important, really good player for Celtic. I think if Iheanacho could regain his fitness, he's also going to be an important player for Celtic. I think both Osmond and Iheanacho are very good players coming off the bench. And I think that's probably Iheanacho's role at Celtic would be the player that comes on the last 20, 30 minutes to make a difference, which is kind of the way that Adam Maeda played for Celtic in the 18 months that he was a Celtic player, be on loan, and then his 1 year as a full-time Celtic player. Most of Maeda's best games and best goals came as a substitute with 20, 30 minutes to play rather than as a starter. Although he did actually start a few games and scored some good goals. A couple of goals against Aston Villa in the Champions League final group game. I think Adam Maeda was a bit of an undervalued player at Celtic, and I think it was a mistake for Celtic to let him go. So I do think he would have done a far better job than the players who got left behind as Celtic's main striker last season. Pat McLaughlin, I think thinks we need two others. I think certainly Celtic really do. Celtic need an out-and-out number one striker. It would be really good if that number one striker was a player with a good history of scoring lots of goals for their clubs and good international experience. Some of the players at Celtic do look to be looking at to be the number one striker for next season. Appear to be very prolific goal scorers, but with not an awful lot of experience, and certainly not experience at the highest level. It's a very interesting player playing in Swiss football called Elias File, 24 years old, 6'1", scored an absolute ton of goals last season in the Swiss league. Very interesting player, good history of scoring goals early in his career in other clubs, but hasn't played at the highest level, hasn't played in European football, actually European competition. So I think he would be a bit of an unproven player. What I would really love to see is a top quality striker coming from Eastern European football, Scandinavian football, North American football, Mexican football, whatever, with lots of goals behind them, 25, 26 years old, and having played international football. So I do think Celtic need an out-and-out first choice striker, backed up by Osman, backed up by Iheanacho. I don't think either Osmond or Iheanacho has the ability to be a starter for Celtic as things stand. So I think we really do need a Kyogo level player, a Giakoumakis level player, or going back a bit further, a Gary Hooper, a Lee Griffiths, an Odson Edward, a Moussa Dembele, a player who can actually score us 30 goals in a season. Chipper67 says, if Osman stays fit, think we'll have a 15 to 20 goal striker. He's deadly for me, pacey, technically good, looks to have good instincts from limited games I've seen him. Yep, I was very, very impressed watching Callum Osman's final season playing for Fulham in the English Premier League under-21 league. I thought he was playing against some very, very good young players. What he's got that few players have got is out-and-out pace. And he's also a very quick-thinking player. I think he's a very bright player. His run into space to get the ball to pass to Maeda for the second goal against Hearts, that showed his pace, it showed his brain, it showed his tactical awareness. His goal against Rangers in the League Cup semi-final again showed great instincts as a striker to be in the right place at the right time, but also the speed of movement and speed of thought to get ahead of the Rangers defenders. So I do think we've got a gem in Callum Osmond, and I think under Martin O'Neill for the next couple of seasons, he'll get a chance to really blossom into being a really top quality player. Completely agree as well, Kieran Allen. Osman needs a guy to lead the way. Yes, he needs a metaphorical father figure or big brother figure of an experienced player to help him improve. Whether that's Kelechi Iheanacho, I'm not so convinced. So what I'm looking for is a more experienced player, mid to late 20s, coming with a bag of goals for a couple of different clubs in medium-sized leagues and international experience. Bit like Kyogo came to us mid-20s from Japanese football, international footballer of that point, one of the best players in the J-League when he came to us. I think that's the sort of player that we should be looking for. It may be a name that we don't particularly know well, but I do think you need to have experience, and I think you need to have a good scoring record over several different seasons to be the player that we require. Chipper67, we need someone who has a proven record of scoring. Maeda had a couple of goals in the season before he came to Celtic. He had scored about 20 goals, as you quite rightly said, the season before. Chavan Chara had a 20-plus goal season for one of the Prague sides, and then he had a pretty miserable time for Borussia Mönchengladbach, a pretty miserable time for the Turkish club he was on loan for, and then scored 2 goals for us in 13 games, and then got himself injured. I personally thought that Chavan Chara was a better player. Chavan Chara was definitely a better player than Adamu, definitely a better player than Mvuka. I think Chavan Chara, one of the problems with Chavan Chara, I think maybe is more his personality. However, Chavan Chara scored a couple of very important goals for us. He scored the penalty against Motherwell as part of that 3-1 win. He scored obviously the pivotal penalty kick against Rangers in the shootout at Ibrox. So he has left me with some very good memories, although in the end his 5 months at Celtic were rather disappointing. Well, Slabbering Cabbage, my intention is once the transfer window does open on Monday, and names do start to crop up as being on Celtic's radar, or players that actually Celtic are bidding for. And my plan is, like I have done in the last couple of summers, is to start doing profile videos of players coming in with their stats, edited highlights of their last season or two, etc. So, and I will try and work out how to pronounce football players' names better. So my intention is, once the transfer window opens on Monday, the 15th of June, so 4 days' time, or 3 days' time, as it will be in 1 minute's time, I will be doing more and more profile videos of players that actually Celtic are said to be looking at, or Celtic are trying to buy. I think it's entirely possible that you can be a good player playing in a lower league. After all, Matt O'Reilly came from, in effect, the third tier of English football. He turned into being a very, very good player for Celtic. He was bought by Ange Postecoglou, and straight into the Celtic squad. Got better and better in his second season at Celtic, even better in his third season at Celtic, which was under Brendan Rodgers. So he came from the third tier of English football. So teams can be in the lower divisions in Switzerland, Spain, England, etc., and still be very good, a very good player. There are in the English Championship, so their second tier, there are a lot of very, very high quality strikers in that league. I do accept that Elias File of FC Aru in Switzerland isn't the most prestigious name. However, he could turn out to be another Georgios Giakoumakis, who was a pretty decent player. He was a high goal scorer, but he was playing, before he came to Celtic, for one of the lower half teams in Dutch football. So, and there's not a big gap between being a player for a team who's in the bottom third or quarter of the Dutch league, from a team who's at the top of the Swiss second division, or the Swiss second level. So I do accept he's not the most prestigious name. However, he could be of very high quality, and certainly his goal output is very, very impressive. But as I was saying earlier on, I don't think he's got the back catalogue of great performances, and nor does he have top level experience. So, but I wouldn't discount him simply because he's been playing for FC Aru in the second level in Switzerland. Anybody who scores 20 odd goals for a team in a season is doing well. And it's mostly two up front. I would like to see Celtic going back to that sort of system. Martin O'Neill, of course, in his first spell at Celtic, 2000 to 2005, did more often than not play with a big tall striker such as Chris Sutton, John Hartson, then a more nippy inside forward in Henrik Larsson playing off them. I always liked having two strikers in my team. So when I've been playing, Championship Manager type things and Football Manager, computer games, I always play two up front. I think the more players you have in the box, the better. The more people who are natural chance takers and goal scorers, I think that's the best thing. And whether Celtic play with a main striker and an attacking midfielder like a Nygren, etc., behind them, Celtic reportedly are looking again at this Jacob Broom of Go Ahead Eagles in Holland, rather, Danish player playing in Holland. He also is primarily can play out wide, but is more, the thought is, of being an attacking midfielder playing behind a main striker. So I'd be all for it. Pat McLaughlin, I think there are a lot of names. There are a lot of names out there, and hopefully, once things start to actually open up on the 15th of June, more and more we'll see actually who Martin O'Neill has been earmarking for scouting and watching over the last 5 or 6 months, because reportedly he and Maloney had been drawing up scouting lists, recruitment lists, etc. Since they got reappointed in January. So I'm very confident that things have been getting done behind the scenes. Oops. San Fran Celtic, I think Martin will want a big physical striker to knock a few folk about the place. I think that's what he was kind of hoping with Iheanacho and kind of hoping with Thomas Chavanchara. I think Iheanacho, if Iheanacho got properly fit, could be that stylist striker. But I do think that Iheanacho would work best in that scenario with another striker playing off him, whether that's a Negrin, whether that's a Callum Osmond, I'm not sure. Again, I don't really think that Johnny Kenny's got the strength and ability to play as a target man centre forward. Also, don't think he's got the goals in him at the highest level to be a Celtic centre forward. Jumper 67, do you think that the boy Nawrocki will get a sniff this season or be moved on? I think he very much will be moved on this summer. I think he's a talented player, no doubt, for Celtic. He has spent an awful lot of his time at Celtic being injured. I think the hope is that next season, or this season coming, so the one that starts in a couple of weeks' time with pre-season, the indications are that Callum Carter-Vickers will be fit and ready to start the pre-season on day one. I think if we can keep Carter-Vickers fit, playing right centre-back all season, I think we've got a very, very good player there for another few seasons. Then it's down to which of Scales or Trusty gets to be the first choice left centre-back. I think Celtic also probably, over the course of the summer, should sign another centre-back or two to give competition to Carter-Vickers and give competition to Trusty and Scales. I think the versatility of Scales and to a lesser extent Trusty is very useful. Scales, a more than decent left back, although a different sort of left back from Kieran Tierney. Although I do think having a proper good backup to Kieran Tierney is very important. The stories about trying to sign Sirachi seem to have gone a wee bit cold, but that might simply be because the transfer window hasn't properly opened anywhere in the world. So I do think Scales is quite an important player in Celtic's squad. Good and reliable, adaptable player, can play left centre-back, can play as a left-back, can play as a wing-back, can play as a left-sided centre-back and a back three. So I think we have got players like him who are quite versatile. Whether Martin O'Neill would ever want to go to a back three, I don't know. He did experiment a couple of times with a back three when Celtic were pushing to try and win games. Thank you very much, Eddie C. Thank you for saying the channel's top class. The channel is just is what it is. I'm fully accepting that my presentation skills, my IT, my quality of cameras and microphones isn't terribly good. It's not nearly as good and slick and professional as most of the channels, but it's just me trying to have a bit of fun, trying to voice my own opinions and try and produce a forum for other people to have their opinions and not drowned out by mates of the person who runs the channel or drowned out by people who pay to get their opinions on the screen, which quite a number of the live streams do, which is not my way of doing things. Tripper67 sad to say you think Jota's finished, which kind of reflects also what Kieran Allen was saying. Jota fits the bill if he can get back anywhere near his level. As I said, had Jota got himself back into the Celtic playing squad for the end of the season just finished, so let's say he came back around about April time, had 4-6 weeks to finish the season, I think there would be a lot of hope for him getting back to his best for the season that's about to start. The fact that he's going to be missing till October, November, possibly December, possibly January, is starting to get very, very dispiriting, because the longer you're out of football, the harder and harder it is to get back into football. And he did take a couple of months to get himself up to speed after we signed him in the winter from Rennes. Unfortunately, just as he was starting to get back towards his better form, he got himself injured, and he's been out for now 13 months and will be out for 18 months at the minimum. So I do have my worries that Jota will ever get back to playing football at anywhere near the level he used to be at. But we can but hope. He's kind of also a player that's kind of disappeared off the Celtic radar. A lot of the other injured players, at least, were still in and around Lennoxtown, in and around the Celtic squad. Whilst they were rehabbing, Jota spent most of his rehab period back at home in Portugal rather than rehabbing in Glasgow. Arnie Engels, in his 2 injury spells last season, at least rehabbed most of the time in Glasgow. Alistair Johnston rehabbed all his time in Glasgow, apart from when he went away off for his operation. So I do think it's quite important that the player is still part of the Celtic squad, which Jota seems to have stopped being. San Fran's, remember when Anne said we should be looking at Iran, etc. for players? I do think there's obviously a lot of quality in Asian football, a lot of quality in Far Eastern football. So countries like Iran, Iraq, etc., there actually are really lots of quality players over there. I think Africa is another continent that Celtic haven't really been looking at, and quite a number of clubs in European football have had a really good conveyor belt of bringing players from African football into their football. Red Bull Salzburg, who we were talking a wee bit earlier on about, in terms of them possibly recruiting Danny Rowe to be their new manager. Red Bull Salzburg, Red Bull Leipzig were both clubs who have quite a lot of players and links to Africa. Obviously, teams in France particularly have a lot of links to African football. And so I do think it's something that I think Celtic should be widening their net to look at footballers all around the world. Because I think there are quality footballers all around the world. And I do think under Brendan Rodgers and Paul Tidsdale, we did get rather focused on buying players from British football and from Central European football. I don't think we quite broadened our net enough to Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, the Americas, and to the Far East. Sorry. Ernest mostly love to see us getting Lennon Miller. I think his career hasn't really taken off in Italian football. He's still a very young player, so that maybe next season he'll get more and more of a chance to establish himself in Italian football. Maybe his club in Italy might look to loan him to Scottish football for a season. I think Lennon Miller would have been a great player for Celtic had we signed him from Motherwell last season. I think he still would be a really good Celtic player if we signed him now, be it on loan for a year or brought him back. I think he would be a great player for Celtic. Chipper67 saying same happened with Ferguson, went to Bologna, took him a year and was built up like a baby rhino, so maybe doing the same with Miller. I think you make a really good point that Lewis Ferguson's first season was a bit disappointing. He's got better and better. Ernest mostly Lennon Miller, McGinn, Calmack, dream midfield. My understanding is that John McGinn signed a new contract at Aston Villa, so don't think there's any hope of getting him back at Celtic or getting him to Celtic for another 2 or 3 seasons, by which time he's probably going to be too old to bring back to Celtic. However, I think signing Lennon Miller would show a lot of ambition. It would be obviously quite a big transfer fee to get him back from Italian football. However, I do think he's a player that Celtic could plan the next 5-10 years with him as a central player in Celtic's midfield. I think he has more than enough ability to take on the Callum McGregor role, more than enough ability to take on the Hatate / Engels role. I think way better than Luke McCowan, way better than Paolo Bernardo. So I do think signing a young Scottish player with lots of ability, but also tons of potential to be a real superstar would be a big move for Celtic. Whether his parent club in Italy would want to loan him to Celtic or sell him to Celtic is another matter. My feeling is probably they're a bit like Bologna and Lewis Ferguson. They're looking to develop Miller over the next couple of seasons to be a star player for them. Things a wee bit different from McTominay and Gilmore, who went, having been established, experienced first choice players for their Premier League clubs and internationally. I think they can go straight into being starters in the Italian league. I think players like Ferguson or Miller need a year or so to build up their experience. So I do think that they probably, their parent clubs are looking at them as development players to build up for future seasons. But no harm in asking them if they want to give us Miller permanently or temporarily. Kieran Allen saying so that they need height in midfield. I do think the fact that we had Engels, who was 6 foot plus, I think that was quite an important thing. I think his physical presence in midfield gave Celtic an extra side to their game. Obviously, McGregor, about 5'10", Hatate 5'8", McCowan. I don't know McCowan's height off the top of my head, but doesn't look a particularly big player. So I do think having that extra size, strength, height in midfield is a big important thing. And for me, that's why I would be keen for Celtic to try and bring Lennon Miller back to Scottish football if they could. 67 Star felt very underrated player and got a lot of criticism. Think he moved because his bird went to Portugal. Fair play. Be like, So Carl Starfelt did move, obviously. Hasn't had the biggest of success over there. Part of the thing also was his parents had moved to that area permanently from Sweden. So I think that was part of it. His fiance was playing in Portugal, so actually there was 2 or 3 hours travel distance between where he was playing and where she was playing. But I think it was actually his family had moved to Spain more than his partner had moved to Portugal. But I would have Carl Starfelt back at the club again. You're quite right. I think he was underrated. I think he had a lot more ability. And obviously Starfelt tended to play as left centre-back for Celtic when he was more naturally a right-sided centre-back for Celtic. But he kind of lost out to Carter Vickers being first choice on the right. Belfast Irish Celt 32 didn't work out for Starfelt. Jacintha ended up dumping him. My understanding was that Starfelt wanted to try himself in a stronger league, but also his mum and dad had moved to permanently living in Spain. So part of that was part. I think his move was more to move to a bigger, stronger, richer league. Partly also moving to be because his parents had moved to that area, although I may be mixing up 2 different stories. Yes, Kieran Allen, height, skill, and creativity. I think you need all three things. I think Engels did give us height, skill, and creativity in midfield. Gave us a reliable penalty taker, which also in Scottish football is an important thing. European football is an important thing. Yes, Belfast Irish Starfelt did okay at Celta Vigo. Don't think he quite established himself as the regular first choice starter. However, he is part of the Swedish international squad over in America at the moment. So we have 1 current Celtic player in Benjamin Nygren, and we have 2 ex-Celtic players in Starfelt and Gustav Lagerbielke. Starfelt and Lagerbielke, more often than not, the backup defenders, although both have started a bit for Sweden recently. Again, I think Nygren's probably liable to be on the bench mostly for Sweden in this World Cup. And as I said in previous live streams, I do think Nygren will be at Celtic for all of next season. I don't see him moving this summer. I see Celtic having him for another season or 2. I don't think his all-round game is quite developed enough for him to move to a bigger, richer leagues. Belfast Irish asking, are we linked with anybody yet? I don't think there's anybody that. So the story, one of the stories was, and a few people have been a wee bit skeptical about whether signing a player from the top team in the Swiss second division is a good move for Celtic. But Celtic reportedly have been in contact with FC Aru of Switzerland regarding this player, Elias File, who's a 6'1", strong striker, good in the air, a lot of pace, very good finisher, 20-odd goals last season in Swiss football. So reportedly Celtic have been in contact with Elias File, with FC Aru and his agents. Reportedly Celtic are top of the list for signing him. There have been video conference calls between the club, the agent, the player. Some people were saying also Martin O'Neill was involved in the video conference call with File. Not really a player for which there's very much video footage that I can find. Celtic's supposedly linked with a player called Benjamin Tahirovic of Brøndby. There's a player who plays for Brann in Norway, Felix Maeda, who's a very talented player, another midfielder. Celtic linked with a couple of different goalkeepers to be backups to William Sinisalo for next season, but nothing concrete. And because the transfer window doesn't open for another 3 or 4 days, no bids, etc. as yet. But I do think there are quite a number of players who O'Neill, Maloney, and the scouting team have been lining up for people to make inquiries and negotiations and first steps with players and managers and agents and so on. Whether any of that comes to pass is another story. Couple of other names have been cropping up, but as I say, nothing definite. And I say I don't think the transfer window really will hot up until it actually opens in Scotland, which is Monday, and then Scotland's transfer window actually stays open for an extra 2 or 3 days at the end of the transfer window for the rest of Europe. So actually Celtic's transfer window or Scotland's transfer window is open for 2 or 3 more days than it is in England or the most of Europe, which does give actually Scottish clubs a wee bit of an advantage in some ways in terms of signing players late on in the transfer window. It may be that a few players who are thinking about coming to Celtic will wait to see whether Celtic get through that 2-legged qualifier in mid and late August before they commit to coming to Celtic. Slabbing Cabbage, since San Fran brought up our fine for pitch celebration fines for Celtic and Motherwell, I've not seen any reporting on the Rangers-Celtic game at Ibrox. I think part of that is the inquiry into the Celtic-Rangers match at Ibrox was much more widespread, much more higher level, much higher levels of policing and so on than the Celtic against Hearts one, in that the pitch invasion at Ibrox lasted about 20 minutes. The pitch invasion, if you want to call that it, for the Celtic Hearts game, lasted 4 minutes in total. Obviously, in the Celtic Rangers pitch invasion at Ibrox, there were a lot of missiles thrown. There were people actually properly injured. There was a Celtic fan that got rugby tackled and knocked to the Celtic staff member that got knocked to the ground. Benjamin Nygren was covered in blood. There were quite a number of incidents of Celtic fans being injured with bottles and flares and stuff thrown at them. So I think the outcome of the Rangers-Celtic Ibrox quarter-final inquiry will probably take an extra month or so before it gets to fruition. The Celtic Hearts one and the Motherwell Celtic one and a couple of others were much easier to resolve because there was much less to sort through, in that there was only, as I say, about 4 or 5 minutes of a pitch incursion in the Celtic Hearts game at the end of the season. So a lot easier for the footballing authorities, much less involvement in that also in terms of policing inquiries and stuff. So, and in the end, the Celtic got given a relatively small fine, and they had a suspended sentence of not loss of points, which was one of the threats, but they've got threats of in terms of away fans and home fans for several different games, lasting for as a suspended sentence for a year or 2 years, etc. So, and also Motherwell and Celtic got in some problems in terms of flares and pyrotechnics, which also for me is something I hopefully Celtic fans and footballing fans in general get rid of pyrotechnics, because they are, for me, a very, very dangerous thing, potentially in the wrong hands. And obviously football fans are the wrong hands for having flares. So I think in the end, Celtic got off with relatively lightly for the Celtic Hearts pitch incursion, mostly because, I say, in the end, once they actually analysed the video footage, the Sky footage, the BBC footage, the closed circuit TV footage from Celtic and from the police, there wasn't really actually anything that happened. About 500 fans, even maybe not even that many, ran onto the pitch. Very few actually got properly onto the pitch. Most of them were on the perimeter of the pitch. There were some fans that confronted Hearts players, and there was some verbals back and forward. There was some pushing and shoving. It appeared mostly from the Hearts players against Celtic fans. There was the Frankie Kent, the backup Hib Hearts defender, who stamped on the mobile phone. So I think, cut a long story short, which is not easy for me, I think it was relatively easy for everybody to resolve that. San Fran Celtic, will McInnes end up at Ibrox? My own personal strong opinion is that Derek McInnes will be the next Rangers manager, one way or the other. He's obviously got absolutely no loyalty to Hearts. I think as soon as he gets a better offer, be it from Rangers or be it from an English Championship club or an English Premier League club, he'll be off. Derek McInnes hasn't spent an awful lot of time at any of the clubs he's been the manager for. A few years at Aberdeen, Kilmarnock, etc. He's obviously a lifelong Rangers fan, mad keen Rangers player. So I think he would be very keen to be the Rangers manager next time around. And say there are quite a lot of indications that Danny Roll is being scouted and targeted by a number of German clubs and now by Red Bull Salzburg in Austria. So I wouldn't be too surprised if over the course of the summer, Roll ends up managing in Germany or Austria, and McInnes moves from Hearts to Rangers to keep his captain from last season company at Rangers. Quite whether Derek McInnes would be able to turn the Rangers players into a better team, I'm not very sure. And as Belfast Irish Celt says, also Derek McInnes hasn't really got a success rate of winning anything anywhere before. San Fran Celtic saying, I think McInnes is at Ibrox by Monday. Certainly, if Hearts, Rangers, Red Bull Salzburg, Wolfsburg, etc. delay it much longer, it is actually starting to eat more and more into the transfer window. So I do actually think Celtic having a manager in place with partway through the week before the transfer window opens is actually a good move, because the window doesn't open till Monday. You can't make any proper signings until after that anyway. So, however, I do think changing manager at this point is onwards would be a bad move. So if Rangers, Hearts, Salzburg, Wolfsburg delay appointing Roll, McInnes, etc., I think it does start to cause more and more problems in terms of a good summer recruitment. Remembering that in the summer of 2021, Ange Postecoglou came in around about the 10th of June that summer. So again, came in just before the transfer window opened. Slightly less successfully, Rodgers came in about 10 days into the transfer window being open. Although his first transfer window was pretty decent, his later transfer windows weren't quite so successful, and got less and less successful for me over the rest of the 2.5 seasons that we had him. I do think to give Derek McInnes some credit, I think he did a good job last season turning Hearts around. He and Tony Bloom made 1 or 2 good signings. I do think Braga, Casaridis are both very decent players. Many of the squad that did well for Hearts last season were players already at the club. I do think he did do a good job of turning them into a team that played for each other. They played, for me, not a particularly exciting or entertaining brand of football, but they were quite successful. ADC, you're forgetting something. We haven't got a scouting team, sad but true. I think Celtic do actually have a good scouting team. I think for me, one of the biggest issues at Celtic in the Brendan Rodgers era was that we did retain having good scouts, but there wasn't a good system of turning the players that were being scouted into being good quality signings. I think for me, a large part of that was the power that Paul Tidsdale had at Celtic for a couple of seasons. Reportedly, he was supposed to oversee the recruitment team, oversee the scouting team, and oversee the academy player development team. I think that was three jobs, none of which he was actually very capable of doing. Possibly, if he'd only had one of those 3 jobs, things might have gone better for him. Partly his role in terms of overseeing player development and academy players was offloaded to Sean Maloney last season, which is the job that he still has at Celtic at the moment. Whether he comes back as a coach and assistant manager or not, he still does actually have that job that he was given last year, which was in part taking away some of the role that Tidsdale had. I think Tidsdale was reportedly head of recruitment, head of scouting, and supposed to coordinate everything. And reportedly with quite a lot of input from Brendan Rodgers as to which players Celtic went after. Whether any of that's true, nobody really knows, because after leaving the club, Tidsdale's kept his mouth shut and Brendan Rodgers has kept his mouth shut. So Belfast, Irish, Celtic, Kieran McKenna taking a break from football. Are we saying Celtic manager the season after next? I think there's there might be a grain of truth in that. Did think it was a bit interesting that he decided to resign his job at Ipswich, having got them re-promoted back to the English Premier League. It was rumoured that he was in line for the job at Fulham. That seems to have fallen through. He says he's taking a year out to be with his family. I do have a feeling that the first job that comes up in the English Premier League, he's probably going to be the first in line to get that job. But we'll see whether he does actually take a year out to be with his family or whether it's just a subterfuge because he's got another job lined up somewhere else. So My understanding is that Celtic do actually have a scouting team. They have got scouts that do go all around the world. That the person who's taken over being in charge of the scouting is a person who was high up in the scouting department at Chelsea. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but reportedly he and Sean Maloney were working together very, very well from January onwards after Tidsdale was sacked. Obviously, we don't see the fruits of those 5 months of player assessment, player scouting, player reports, etc., until the transfer window opens in a few days' time, and then supposedly we'll see who Maloney and the chap who came from Chelsea have been targeting. Well, everybody is entitled to their opinion. I thought under Ange Postecoglou we had a relatively good scouting department, a relatively good recruitment team. Whether Ange Postecoglou was leading that up, whether he was whether he had a much bigger role in terms of scouting than Brendan Rodgers took, I don't know. I thought Celtic had a pretty decent scouting team and success rate in terms of bringing players to the club. In the 2 years under Ange Postecoglou, I think it fell apart under Rodgers. That's because a lot of the Postecoglou team moved on, although the core scouts as such stayed at Celtic. It was the head of scouting that got changed when Rodgers came in, and obviously Tidsdale then came in with this overarching job that was supposed to bring all those things under one heading. But I think that obviously was a failure. Well, Paul Maguire, my understanding of the story with Ida and Kasper Dolberg was that Kasper Dolberg was lined up to come in to play for Celtic. Celtic had agreed a fee with Anderlecht. Dolberg was not keen, so Celtic had agreed a deal with Anderlecht, but Dolberg didn't want to come and play in Scotland, and then Dolberg was offered the chance at the last minute to go and play for Ajax in Amsterdam, a team he'd played for before, and he was very keen to move from Belgian football back to Dutch football. So I don't think that one actually was Celtic's fault. I think it was Celtic got a deal negotiated with Anderlecht, then Dolberg backed out at the last minute. I still think it was a mistake to let Ida go until Dolberg was actually in the door. I don't think Celtic should have let Ida go. However, Dolberg got cold feet at the last minute. Dolberg decided he didn't want to come to Scotland, and then the transfer to Ajax appeared at the last minute, and Dolberg signed for Ajax at the same time as Iheanacho signed for Celtic, because the Dutch window was open for a few more hours the next day. So he got signed the next day, much like Iheanacho did. So. And to be fair to Iheanacho did score 9 goals for Celtic last season in all competitions. He scored 3 goals in the Scottish Cup run, two in the semi-final, one in the final. He scored some very important goals in that run of 7 league wins in a row. Scored obviously a really massive goal against Motherwell to win the game. He scored the winning goal against Dundee in the game that triggered the 7 matches unbeaten and 7 wins in a row into the season. So one can fault Celtic in a lot of different ways, but Iheanacho in the end did score a whole lot of goals at the key point of the season, where we went 7 league games with 100% and 2 cup games with 100%, and say Iheanacho scored a lot of important goals in that last 9 games of the season. Anyway, it's now 1:45 in the morning, so I think it's probably time to call it a day, call it a morning, call it an end to the live stream. Now, I'm going to be away on holiday next week, so not sure whether we'll be doing a live stream next Thursday or not. It depends a wee bit on what the Wi-Fi is like at the place that we're going to stay next week. But what I will be doing is, once we do get to the place that we're going to on holiday to, we're driving down on Monday. Once I see what the internet's like there, what the Wi-Fi is like, I'll make a decision as to whether the Wi-Fi is good enough for us to have a live stream again next Thursday. And then I'll have to negotiate with Mrs. David 67 whether she's happy for me to give up a couple of hours of our holiday for us to do a live stream. I'm afraid, Sligo boy, Sean South Gary Owen, our house won't be empty, in that little Miss David 67, our daughter, is coming to house sit and to look after our 3 cats. So the house will be occupied all next week by little Miss David 67 and our 3 cats. So to cut a long story short, thank you very much, everybody who has participated. It's been, for me, a great, fun, friendly debate, discussion, lots and lots of opinions, lots and lots of different opinions. I don't think there's been any not nice comments, which is a big contrast to last week's live stream when there was 2 or 3 people making trouble. So, as I said, we'll finish the live stream for tonight here. Hopefully, over the course of the next week or so, we'll get some more and more news of Celtic's coaching staff, Celtic's player recruitment, which players are staying, which players are going, which players are coming in. And once I get a chance to see how the Wi-Fi is at the wee rural place we're staying in next week for holidays, so as I say, we'll find out. I'll find out next week what the Wi-Fi is like, and I'll make a decision probably on Wednesday as to whether we have a live stream on Thursday. Otherwise, we'll definitely have one in 2 weeks' time once I'm back from my holidays. But if I can get the Wi-Fi to work properly at our holiday cottage and negotiate with Mrs. David 67, we'll be back next Thursday. And I think that's also a really good note to finish on, certainly for any Scottish Celtic fans. Come on, Scotland. So hoping for a nice win for Scotland on Sunday against Hatate. Scotland can then move on, get a draw against Morocco or Brazil, and then get themselves into the knockout phase, which would be, for me, a very good omen for Scotland, but also a good omen for Celtic having a good season next season as well. So, without any further ado, thank you very much, everybody who has participated today. Thank you very much for all those who've been here on the live stream with me right from the first minute. People like Sean South, Gary Owen, Ernest Mosley, Paul Maguire, Kieran Allen, lots and lots of people. Thank you very much. And also thank you to some of the ones who joined a wee bit later on. Belfast, Irish, Celtic, Slabber and Cabbage, etc. So, as I say, I'll make a decision once I get to the holiday cottage regarding the Wi-Fi, whether we have another live stream next Thursday. And I will send out a wee promotional thing or a wee information thing probably next Tuesday, Wednesday, and otherwise we'll have a live stream 2 weeks today. So so until the next live stream, thank you very much for everybody. Goodbye and hail, hail.